If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. Have you ever encountered cryptids, humanoids, paranormal creatures, or other mysterious beings like Sasquatch, stick Indians, Mothman, Wendigo, etc.? What happened? 2 encounters. First, I was 13 maybe? About 20 years ago, in a rural area of Świętokrzyskie in Poland. There are many forests around. It was night. I looked through the window at the neighboring house. I could swear that I saw a humanoid creature standing on top of the roof. His head was owl-like, and his hands looked like they had long feathers. The creature had long feather-like strips that extended from his hands to his elbows. It was dark, and the only light source on that figure was a far street light. When I turned away for a second and looked back, it was gone. I was young and almost SHT myself. I still don't know what it could be, only my imagination playing tricks. The second incident occurred in the same area approximately 7 years ago. I was driving in the middle of the night, and on the side of the road I saw a creature looking like, don't lock, please, capybara, but the size of the cow. And the strange thing was it was only 2-legged. Like a crossover between gigantic capybaras crossed with kiwi birds. I'm not sure if I want to share this because I can't explain what I saw, but I feel the need to do so with someone. My backyard is insanely close to a section of the Appalachian Trail. I spent my childhood growing up in the surrounding woods. Only 2 things ever made me nervous when I was alone in the woods: Lyme disease and other humans. That was until I moved here. The first incident took place during the summer a couple years ago. My children were playing in the backyard on their trampoline and had mentioned seeing a dog, but considering my neighbors all have dogs, I didn't give it too much thought and gave them a safety talk about not approaching strange animals and to come get me if they see anything else. When I went out back to check on them, they were fine, but across the field, right at the tree line, some movement caught my attention. It was a shaggy black dog, wolf. It was enormous because there was a fallen tree in that spot, and it gave me a fairly accurate reference for size. It turned and silently hopped over the tree and into the woods. It scared me, and my kids spent the rest of the day never leaving my eyesight. It was surreal. I've never seen anything like it. The second incident happened this morning when I let my labs out to do their thing. I was standing, waiting for them to finish up, when I saw something move out of the corner of my eye again on the tree line. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me because when I turned to look, it was gone. I looked to see if there was anything that could cause my brain to create a pattern, but there was nothing. What I saw reminded me of the Fresno nightcrawler, but it had arms and a head. It was tall and thin, with thick, long white hair or fur. I feel crazy just typing this out, but I know I saw something that I really can't explain. Pale white skin with long beards. The ruins of ancient stone monuments dot the Appalachian Mountains, and according to Native American legends, these are buildings left by the Moon-Eyed People. The Moon-Eyed People were a small, nocturnal race of men with pale white skin and long beards. They were unable to see in daylight. An 850-foot-long stone wall at the border of North Carolina and Georgia, built between approximately 400 and 500 CE, is credited to the Moon-Eyed People. The wall, anywhere from 2 to 6 feet tall, is said to be from a war the Moon-Eyed People fought against the Creek Indians, who attacked during the full moon. Even the light of the full moon was too bright for the small bearded people, and the Creek drove the Moon-Eyed People underground, where they are said to remain. Some attribute the white-bearded Moon-Eyed People to another legend of Welsh travelers led by Prince Madoc, who arrived in that general area of North America in 1170 CE. However, at best, the evidence of a Welsh incursion into North America 300 years before Columbus arrived is tenuous. And it's probably safe to say the Welsh have always been able to see in sunlight. The Moon-Eyed People remain a mystery. I've never really told this story for fear of ridicule, but I've been listening to some stories here, and I feel safe to share. 10 years ago, I worked at a Walmart in Northeast Ohio. I was doing a week of night shifts to help with inventory coming up. I had finished my shift, and I was on my way home about 6 to 7 a.m. on a Sunday. There was light fog, and on the 15-minute drive home I passed maybe 3 or 4 other cars, just a very quiet small town Sunday morning. I was coming under the SR 82 overpass when a shape darted from my right-hand side across the road in front of me. I slammed my brakes, knowing it was a deer. I was slack-jawed and bewildered when I saw what looked like a shaggy, lanky dog with long, slender legs and greenish-gray fur standing 5 high at the shoulder, if he was an inch. I could not believe what I was seeing. He finished crossing the road headed west in the direction of a church right there, and I sat there for probably a 10-second dead stop on 193 northbound before I shook myself out of it and shakily drove home. I did research trying to find a sane answer, and the closest I could find was the Irish wolfhound, but it's still not right. I've never been satisfied with no real answers. Has anyone experienced anything like this? When I was 15 years old, now 37, I was driving on a road trip with my mom to Portland, Oregon. We were driving along I-84, and we had just passed an old cement factory outside a small town about an hour away from the Idaho/Oregon border. Out in the distance, I could see a dark-looking figure walking upright near the factory. It looked almost human-like but was hard to make out as I was observing it from afar. My mom started asking me a question, so I redirected my focus to her, and as we were chatting, I saw something out of the corner of my eye flying alongside our SUV. It was an extremely large, black-looking bird. Massive beak, talons so long it could pick up a deer, and a wingspan of at least 20 feet. Its feathers were iridescent, and it gazed in through the window, making direct eye contact with me. I stared in horror as I couldn't help but notice the body of this creature was the same length as our car. We made eye contact for a few seconds. My mom and I both yelled, "What is that?" in disbelief. Before I could really say much more, the creature stuck its neck out and soared into the sky before it seemingly disappeared without a trace, as if an invisible portal opened up and swallowed it. The time was 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and the sky was blue. There was no sign of any bad weather, and I was alone. I was a very sober 15-year-old who just witnessed something I could not identify. I actually grew up bird watching and going to the Birds of Prey park near my hometown. Before you ask, was it an owl? An eagle? A vulture? It was not. Years later, I was watching a campy show called Missing in Alaska, and there was an episode devoted to the Alaskan Thunderbird. After watching this episode, I can say without a doubt this is what I witnessed. Back in 2015, when I was in Moses Lake, Washington, for Job Corps, one night, around midnight 1 a.m., on a weekend, a few of the guys in the dorm were looking out the window that had a good view of the field between the campus and the adjacent community college, saying there was something weird out in the field. Naturally, this draws the attention of everyone else who was awake in the dorm, and suddenly there's around 15 to 20 of us crowding around the windows. What we saw was a pair of orbs giving off a faint yellowish/orangish glow moving around in the field with what looked to be an 10-foot tall, 5-foot shoulder-width bipedal horned entity zipping back and forth between the orbs as they moved around. The orb's limited light and the distance of approximately a mile hindered my ability to discern fine details. However, I managed to discern its black or dark brown color, long arms that ended in claws, two large, curved horns forming a U-shape on a relatively small head, fairly short and stubby legs for its size with hooved feet, and a peculiar, thin, nearly elliptical hole that appeared to have been torn down its torso, which we could see through as it moved. Now I say it was zipping between the orbs because it didn't look so much like it was walking as like it was almost instantly going between them, like when an Enderman teleports in Minecraft for lack of better description. At one point it briefly turned its face toward our dorm for a bit, and let me tell you the way it felt like its gaze was piercing right through me into my core. So naturally everyone was now clearly uncomfortable and feeling really spooked upon realizing what we were seeing, and we were trying to figure out just what it was, like was this thing alien/ghost/demon/etc. If anyone has an idea what that was, it's been on my mind for the last 9 years, and I've been trying to find accounts of anything even remotely similar. I was outside in the backyard at my townhouse at night. We didn't have an alleyway at the back of my yard, all the yards were divided by just a fence. My cat was meowing, and I found her stuck in the middle of the back fence between my yard and the neighbor's yard. So I guided her along the fence until she reached an opening at the end of the yard line. Once I reached the end of my yard, my cat got spooked and started hissing at something in the yard diagonal to mine. She wouldn't move, and so I looked down into the yard and saw what I thought was a pit bull, as it was on 4 legs and was almost grayish in color. Keep in mind that it was very dark as I only had my outdoor light at the back of my house on and no lights were on any of the houses on the other side, behind the fence. Also, there had been nobody living in the house diagonal from where I lived, at least it never seemed like it, since I had moved in approximately 2 years prior to this. As I tried to focus my eyes and figure out exactly what it was that I was looking at, I realized the thing didn't have a face, and when I realized that, the thing turned around, and I saw that its back legs were inverted. This freaked me the F out, and I panicked, and I grabbed my cat and ran back into my house. I tried to get my sister to come and take a look with me, and she refused. I was looking out my window, and I saw it stand up from behind the fence and just stare towards me. It was quite tall, maybe about 7 or so feet, a lot taller than it looked on 4 legs. My sister wouldn't come over to the patio doors to look, and so I ran and grabbed her then boyfriend and told him about it, and he came back down with me. When we looked out again, it wasn't standing up anymore, and we walked all along the fence line in the yard, looking into the neighboring yards, and couldn't find anything. It still really bothers me to this day that I'm the only one who saw it. And all my sister had to do was walk 6 feet over to the patio doors, but she was too scared to look. Location: Petras, Peloponnese, Greece. Date: June 24, 2001. Time: 1:50 a.m. Mr. G. P., a professor at the University of Petras, was watching television at night at his home. His wife and small son were asleep in their rooms. His daughter was away. When he turned the TV set off, he noticed that the kitchen light was on. He went to turn it off and then felt a cold chill, like there was a cold wind blowing. Turning back, he came face to face with a tall, 2 meters, and lanky humanoid that was wearing something like a tight-fitting blue overall with wave-like patterns. Its face had very vague human characteristics, having bumps where facial features should have been. The witness thought the creature somehow resembled a computer graphic. The creature began moving in enormous leaps, like the leaps of the hurdles athletes, but in slow motion, like a dancer with his toes not touching the ground. It left the kitchen and entered the lavatory. The door was open. The witness chased it, but the lavatory was empty. Then he saw it again, coming out of his daughter's room and disappearing into the kitchen. Then, for a third time, the creature came out of the lavatory and vanished into the living room. After that, it was not seen again. The witness was in shock after the experience and did not hear any sound or feel any odor during the incident. He could not say if the sense of cold persisted during the entire incident because he was very stimulated to notice it. He had the impression that the creature was running away from something or hunted by something and wanted to avoid any contact. The closest distance between the witness and the humanoid was 2 meters. He also had the impression that the creature was something solid, moving in an ethereal way. Very bizarre entity indeed. It appears to have been composed of some kind of energy or light. The possibility of a holographic type entity cannot be discarded. Our family cat used to run outside, park her butt near a tree, then run away when I got close enough to grab her. Rinse and repeat once or twice, then she'd let me snatch her up and take her back inside. Anyway, one night, I went to take out the trash late at night, half asleep. She ran out the door toward the tree and stopped short. I approached and caught a glimpse of what looked like a pale white child-sized creature, but too skinny, with elongated limbs. I didn't register what it was wearing, only that it looked very pale, ghastly white. I only saw it for a moment before it slipped behind the tree. It took every ounce of courage I had to get that cat. I got close, she bolted past the tree. So I had to walk past it, and of course, there was nothing lurking behind it. I grabbed the cat, ran inside, freaked out for a minute, and then told myself that I was tired and just had a visual hallucination, mind playing tricks, forget about it. A few weeks later, I'm cleaning out the dryer. It vents under my house, which I don't love, but that's how the house came. Anyway, I had the hose detached, and while I'm sucking up the lint, a pale, skinny hand popped up the hole in the floor and snatched a sock. I shoved the dryer back over the vent so fast and didn't hook it back up until my spouse came home. I told myself it was a raccoon hand and moved on. A little while after that, my neighbor, who's a bit odd, so I take everything she says with a grain of salt, says to me that she doesn't feel comfortable going outside at night and that I should be careful. I asked why, and she said, because of the skinny people. It's been a couple years, and I haven't seen anything else. Then I heard about crawlers and decided to share it. Yeah, I'm not sleeping tonight. My friend always tells the story that back in high school, he was hanging out with a few friends near Charlotte, and they were outside playing flashlight tag around 11 p.m. He ran to the front yard since there was no one else there and saw a large crawler slowly crawling down the road. He turned right around, slipped onto his buttocks, got up right away, and ran to the backyard. He was only up front for a moment, but they were all standing on the porch, saying he had been missing for about 20 minutes and that they had looked in the front yard calling his name and no one saw him. He's completely sure he never blacked out or got disoriented, but even the clock said that a lot more time had passed. Creepiest cryptid. The giant baboon version of the Nandi bear, Kadoolo, which is supposed to be extremely ferocious and strong enough to kill a rhinoceros, is uncomfortable to think about if you know what regular baboons are capable of. Some descriptions of water tigers, supposed aquatic saber-tooths or otters in the Guianas, are a little unpleasant. They're supposed to kill children, not in a bogeyman way but in a literal, allegedly confirmed by autopsy way. A papoke was blamed, officially, for killing a 7-year-old boy in French Guyana in 1962. He was found in the river, eviscerated, missing an arm, with his face eaten. But the version from Guyana is particularly strange and very violent. It's also called the water monkey and is sometimes said to be a humanoid, But I think the second quote makes it clear that it's the same fanged carnivoran as the others, if it's real. 1. A water monkey he had once seen. It was enormous and jet black. It had a grinning mouth full of sharp teeth. It swam at a tremendous speed. Its habit was to submerge itself and wait for bathers whom it would draw down and pound to pieces on the rocks at the bottom. 2. A group of Boy Scouts from Georgetown were swimming on the Mackenzie side of the Demerara River when one of the boys just disappeared without a sound. His body was later found on the mudflat, his chest ripped open and his heart and liver missing. On another occasion, in the upper reaches of the river at Clemwood, some schoolchildren were crossing on their way to school when a girl gave a piercing scream, pointing to a large, hairy hand with long nails clutching the gunwale of the boat. One boy had reacted quickly, bringing down the paddle he was holding in a sharp, cruel arc to hit the hand with a sickening crunch. The thing let loose of the gunwale and broke the surface of the water to disclose a feline face with 2 protruding fangs. Its head and chest were covered with hair. It did not surface again. There were several other instances over the years of drowning of children, mostly boys, in the Wismar-Christiansburg area. In many cases, according to medical testimony, the heart had been dug out of these victims by the time their bodies were recovered. It brings to mind my first visit to the interior in 1925 when I saw a grown Amerindian woman, whose face had been hideously disfigured by such a creature when she was a child, bathing by the river. I have a story that I cannot pass off as a paranormal or ghost story. It happened when I was a kid in Macedonia. I used to visit my grandma a lot, who lived with 2 other members of my family in a house with a farm in the back. This is in a village where everyone knows each other and has a lot of land. Ours was mostly grass/no trees, in the back of their houses. I've had a few cryptid encounters whenever I stayed there. I always imagined someone hopping from barn to barn as a kid because oftentimes chickens would just disappear overnight, and many neighbors reported this. On one instance I was walking back from the barn to the house when a huge, hairy-clawed arm reached over me from the second floor, which does not have walls, just used for hay storage. I'm assuming it was an arm, but all I saw was brown hair with different shades all over it. There was hay on the ground where it reached, so I knew to get the duck away from there and ran back. I know very little about animals still, so I wonder what that could have been. I saw what seemed to be claws, so I thought maybe a bear? But I'm very unsure. Another time, the hay was rearranged so that there was a small hole in the middle. I was staring at that place for no longer than a few seconds when I crystal clear saw a huge, human-like red eye from there looking around the area. From then on, I was solid in my belief that there was something there. Yet I haven't been able to find any information. Bears do not have red eyes, as far as I know, and I'm not sure if they can climb ladders. This animal was probably huge considering the size of the eye. I am not bullshitting. This is not a place in the world that gets a lot of media coverage and much less people willingly studying cryptids because people are trying to make enough money to feed their family. If anyone has any idea, I'd appreciate your comment because I'm looking to get this mystery solved. The closest I've gotten was a book I read that mentioned something about an East European monster very similar to the way I described it. Huge red eyes, brown fur, claws, big, yet I don't think it was a monster. Those stories have to have their origin somewhere in real life, right? Anyway, thank you for listening. I hope one of you can point me in the right direction. I've been doing some research lately in my Native American tribe and want to investigate whether or not this supposed cryptid has been seen recently. There is a certain supernatural spin to this legend, so I don't know how well this particular cryptid is received. I live in Michigan. That Wendigo is a legend that is deeply ingrained in my tribe's history. I am part of a Native American tribe. This cryptid is said to be born from a person that has become a cannibal. It mostly seems to be a cautionary tale to deter such behavior. The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tautly over its bones. With its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets, the Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody. Unclean and suffering from suppurations of the flesh, the Wendigo gave off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. This seems to be a pretty well-received description of the cryptid. Any help would be amazing. I saw a video a while back that featured stories of Dogman sightings, and one story in particular caught my attention. It was a person who lived with their mom on a rural property in either Mississippi or Missouri. This property had a ton of wildlife that they saw every day, but one day a dogman appeared near their house that Op's mom saw while on a hike. For the next several days, it would stalk around their house at night, scratching at the walls and growling. One night, they heard sounds of a struggle right outside and something slamming into the wall, and in the morning, they found the half-eaten remains of a deer and a series of tracks indicating the Dogman had chased the deer towards their house before catching and eating it. A few days later, the Dogman is once again stalking around the house at night, but this is when something crazy happens. Among the local wildlife op and their mom were familiar with was a large male black bear. That night, the bear wandered near their house while the Dogman was lurking outside, saw the Dogman, and aggressively confronted it, no doubt seeing it as a rival predator intruding on his territory. Op and their mom heard the sounds of growling, roaring, and fighting outside as a brief brawl ensued, followed by a long standoff. Eventually, the black bear successfully chased off the Dogman, and it was never seen or heard from again. They saw the bear a few days later, having a few injuries from the fight but nothing severe, and he did eventually recover. A couple of months ago, my friend and I decided that we would like to go down to this place called Black Canyon. It's a nice rural spot, not too many people go there, but the main attraction is the lake and the small cliffs that you can jump off of. It's always better to go later in the day so the sun isn't beating on you the whole time, so my friend and I decided it would be wise to get there around 6 p.m. It was honestly like any other kind of day, nothing out of the ordinary. There were people hanging out in this middle of nowhere place, and we were all having a good time. I sent some off the cliff, but then I forgot about the natural water slide that's about a 3 to 5 minute walk away from the lake. I asked the people to watch over our stuff, got my friend, and decided to go check it out since I haven't gone down in a long while. It took us about 5 minutes to get there because my friend is very cautious, and looking at it now, if they hadn't been, I might have had a bad run-in with whatever the hell we came into contact with. Right as we were about to get to the water slide, I heard this indescribable noise. The closest thing to it was like a demonic generator going off. It was certainly nothing I had ever heard before. In all honesty, I didn't believe what I was hearing at first, so I quickly turned to my friend and asked, "Hey dude, did you hear the same thing I just did?" My friend turned and looked a little frightened and said, "Yeah." Neither of us could determine what it was, but that wasn't going to stop me from going down this slide. Yes, that was a terrible decision. I started to walk on down to the natural water slide, leaving my friend behind, when I swear I saw a round head and a lanky arm fly behind a rock I was about to pass by. I frozen at first, but I figured that my eyes were playing tricks on me. People see things that aren't real all the time, right? Anyway, I only took one step forward before I heard the same noise as before, only much louder. The same demonic-like generator noise boomed out from behind the rock that I saw something dart behind. After that, I turned tail and ran as fast as I could back to my friend. I asked again in a frightened tone, practically shouting, "Did you hear that?" My friend looked as on edge as I was and just responded with a simple yes. After hearing my friend's answer, we ran as fast as we could back to the lake. When we came back out of breath, the people asked us what was wrong. I told them what my friend and I had encountered, and they looked extremely surprised. A man then spoke up and told me that I wasn't the only one with this sort of run-in. He told me that many people have told him that they've heard strange noises over by the waterfall. People believed it to be a skinwalker or a Wendigo. After hearing that, I've never gone back to that waterfall since. Something lingers there, and I don't really want to find out what. I live in the Sierra Nevada foothills of California. 7 acres of land, most densely forested and wild. There is a very large pond half a mile behind my house on a neighboring property. My closest neighbor was this old lady who left her home because her husband passed away and she couldn't take care of herself, so for many years it sat abandoned. 3 years ago, I was outside just before sunset doing some work in my side yard, and I looked over at my neighbor's house. This house was about 100 to 130 yards away from mine. I saw this large creature walking upright. All black, top to bottom, walking upright, heading downhill towards the pond. What weirded me out at first was that the arms were too long. My brain kept trying to assume that it was someone carrying something. It moved quick. And the temperature was hot outside, so it would be bonkers to be wearing an all-black suit on empty property with no vehicles around and walking straight into the dense woods. I called my neighbor, who was staying with her children in another city, immediately and asked her if a large person was supposed to be on her property. She said, no. Right after that, I started looking into this whole Bigfoot thing and became a believer. Also, black bears live in the area and occasionally hit up my trash can, but this creature definitely didn't walk like a black bear. I was 18, 7 years ago, when the most terrifying thing happened to me. I still get very frightened thinking about it. I was walking home from work. It was 10 p.m. and very dark and quiet on the streets. It's a 20-minute walk from the train station to my house, and I'd usually just take it slow and take in my surroundings. I was practically home, about 1 minute away from my house, when a really tall, skinny person came out from a small alley to the left of me and behind my back to cross the road to my right. They were so close and fast that it really startled me. I internally made the decision that I would monitor the situation and put my phone away because I felt super uneasy. I thought they were trying to rob me. I had to take a left a few steps after this encounter to go underneath a small bridge and cross a road directly after the bridge to get onto my street. I took the left underneath the bridge, and I turned around just to check if this person had gone. Remember, they had just crossed the road in the opposite direction and headed the opposite way. This thing was no more than 4 steps behind me, walking so fast. I ran across the road and decided that I was going to have to do a test on my street to see if I was being followed, and had to think fast because I didn't want them seeing where I lived. My street is gated, so I knew when I went in and they followed me in that I had to try and lose them because I wasn't going to stop or say anything to them given how scary the whole situation was. Everything about this thing was unsettling, the body being so large and gangly, the movements, how they got so close to me so quickly. We have a gated bin area, so I sped up and took a left around the bin, and of course they followed me. I then took a right around the bin. Basically, I circled the bins to try and get them to go away without seeing where I lived. They followed me the whole way around the bin and were so close to me. I was 10 seconds from my house, and at this point, fearful for my life, all I could do was scream and run. I did, and while running, I looked behind me, and they were springing so fast towards me, their arms moving so fast and long. I ran as fast as I could, crying and screaming and banging my door. My mom ran and opened it right away. I have never been anxious in my entire life. Even though they were no more than 4 steps behind me, I couldn't see their face. Yes, the streets are well lit, I live in a big city. I have never encountered anything like this before or after. When I got in all, I could describe it as a thing. I'm not scared by much, but I was sobbing. Mummy, it wasn't male or female, it wasn't a person. They were literally completely black, had a black coat with a hood that looked as if a woman had a bun on the top of her head, and put a hood over the top of it, really elongated. They were extremely large, unhumanely large but really skinny. With really long arms and legs and torso. And of course an elongated head. When they ran, they used their arms stretched out in front of them. As weird as this sounds, almost sloth-like. They never made a sound, not even when walking or running. Their hands were straight down beside them until they started running. It sent shivers down my spine, remembering this figure. I still think of it, and it scares me. I believe the creature I saw running across the highway at 3 a.m. in July 2023 was a Wendigo, with tall hind legs resembling human legs, black skin, and a bony back. I didn't know what I was looking at during that time. I almost hit it, and after having my tiny heart attack, I realized what it was I had actually seen. The rest of the creatures I've seen, I knew what they were or were familiar with them for the most part. Almost positive it was a chupacabra or a like creature attacking my half-coyote dog when it was protecting our cattle when I was about 9 or 10. She had a quarter-shaped gaping hole in her chest when we got her inside and couldn't explain the wound because my country boy dad had never seen anything like it, and Ice has never seen anything like it since. I lived in a house with people shadows. Don't know what else to call them. They were androgynous black figures that would move around in the almost shadows and love to run past open doors to make you think you were crazy. Also, I don't know what it was, but I have heard both my mom and my dad's voices call for me in my house and in the middle of the woods screaming my name, knowing at the time that there was no way it could have been them, but I never figured out what that was, but it was creepy. Also pretty sure I slipped into a backroom type place on accident a week ago but have no idea who to talk to about that weirdness. There's some weird shit you run into when you basically live in the middle of nowhere. Need help identifying. I think it was a werewolf. I'm from Brazil, and I've seen a lot of things in these short 21 years of my life, but one time I was on a trail with a friend. We started very late, like 22 p.m., and finished around 1 a.m. near a residential area with an old church and cow pastures. My friend needed to deliver to a woman. He knew some pots and pans that she had borrowed so we could make food and sweets for the Feast of São João, a Catholic holiday. On the way back home, we needed to walk a long dirt road, which was separated from the pastures by a fence and trees back to back, start to end of the road. We carried flashlights, but the night was very bright due to the road being very wide and open. Midway through the long road, we started to hear some rumbling on the fence side behind the trees. I said that probably was a dog, and my friend believed. The sound became little by getting closer the further we walked, and my friend stated that it was a very big dog. We kept walking until the noise was right behind our necks. With that ominous presence, I took a piece of wood that we carried in case we were attacked by dogs and etc. on the trails and asked my friend to shine the flashlight on the fence, and that was when I saw it. A big skinny figure standing up in his two hind legs. His arms were so long they touched the ground like a ducking gorilla, leaning back and hiding his true height, looking me in the eyes with his crooked spine. It looked like a terminal anorexic bull with a deformed face without horns but with neck hair like a fake mane and moonlight gray skin and shine eyes. This 1 second looked like an eternity. As soon as the light went out, my friend ran and shouted for me to follow. I ran like I never needed to run before, with that thing running beside me on the other side of the trees. When we reached the end of the road, we were graced by the statue of Our Lady Fatima standing still in his shrine, and the thing had vanished in the fields. I asked him if he had seen it, and he said no, and that he ran in fear. For so long, I thought it was a werewolf, but it was so different from anything I have ever heard of, and I truly don't know what that was, but it still visits me in my dreams, lurking in the corners of my eye. My father works as a security guard for a ranch in Mexico. He's from Oaxaca. He lives in Oaxaca, and sadly, I'm here in the US. Hopefully one day I can prove it for them. Well, 2 hours ago, my mother called me all shocked up, and I asked what happened. My mom said it's better if my dad told me what happened. So he did, he said, while he and the other 3 guys were guarding the ranch of a friend. Something came into the ranch. First off, the ranch is big, so all 4 men had a pickup truck. They all parked the car in all the corners of the ranch, like a square. My father was on the south side, where the animals are kept. He said around 2 a.m. He woke up to the dogs barking and animals acting up. He stood up and listened. Out of nowhere, the back of the truck started to move, and then he saw it, this giant creature with horns on his head and a body resembling a bear. He said all he could see was the glowing red eyes. The beast walked all around the truck, staring at my father. My father had a shotgun behind his head, but he was frozen in fear. The beast stood in front of the truck, grabbing the bumper and shackling the truck. My father said he thought the beast was going to flip the car over. But it didn't, it just scared my father and ran off to the empty fields. After he saw it was far away, he drove off to the house and called his friend and told him. I quit. He said the beast looked like it had a bear-like body with horns and spiked up ears. He could see white or gray hair on the chest, and when it ran off like an animal. He thinks it was a werewolf or Wendigo. What do you all think he saw? Some friends who are a couple came over late one night to visit my wife and me. We decide after hanging out for some time, spur of the moment, let's go to the movies and see what's playing as it's only like 20 minutes away. This is SoCal, by the way, so everything is just a quick freeway ride away. My wife is driving her Civic, and our friends are in the back seat. My friend decides he's going to be a cool guy and lay his head in his girl's lap. As we are coming down the long off-ramp, I turn back to my friend in the backseat to talk shit and tell him to stop trying to get frisky with his girl, and I feel the car brake really hard all of a sudden. As I'm turning forward, I glance at my wife as if to say, "What the hell?" and see the look of shock on her face. I then quickly look forward to seeing a huge man-sized shadow coming at the windshield. I flinch as it's about to hit the window, but it just pulls up right above the car and misses us. We all start freaking out and yelling, "What the duck was that?" It was huge. The only one not seeing it, of course, was my friend laying down, as all he saw was the light flicker as it flew over the car. The wingspan was far wider than the car, and they were not feather wings. The only other way to describe it, and I know this sounds dumb, is when Batman glides down and spreads his cape to slow down just before hitting the ground. Except this thing adjusted to fly over us and did not land behind us because my wife came to a complete stop after almost hitting it. We looked behind us and saw nothing. It did not make any noise coming toward us or after. It was far larger than the car, or at least it seemed like it. When I caught view of it, it was already in the air. When my wife saw it, she said it seemed to come off the street light that lights the off-ramp. Me being the skeptic said it could have been a trick of the eye making the backlighted thing look larger, like perhaps some large nocturnal bird of prey. When it was coming at the car, though, it sure as hell looked like it had substantial height and width. My friend was pissed he didn't see it. The girls were so freaked out and scared though that we decided to just go home. To this day, my wife can't watch Jeepers Creepers because of the damn man. I sing the theme song, and she gets creeped out. Hello everyone, I'm sure this experience seems strange, but even if no one believes me, I still would like to get this off my shoulders without being judged as to everyone else I've told. They think I'm crazy. Me and my family live in Maryland, right next to Appalachia, where we live on a main road that connects quite a few small towns and goes into a few bigger cities, and behind our house there's a few layers of environments, including, in order, a cow pasture directly behind, a field, and then some woodlands, which go on until it meets the road behind it and are also clearly visible from my house. It was a warm sunny day in May 2021 where I was in my last class at school, eager to be released so I could go back to whatever I was doing that morning, which they eventually did, of course, with no homework, to where I closed my Chromebook, put away my notebook, and went downstairs and watched YouTube in the living room where my mom was there playing with my baby brother, who couldn't go to school yet, of course, as he was only one, to where she greeted me, to which after I answered, she went on playing with my little brother. About 8 minutes later, she checked the time on her phone and saw that it was ready to go wait for the bus, as she liked to get out a few minutes early even though the bus dropped my siblings off at our front door. After she did so, she got up, picked up my baby brother and got his shoes on, and asked me if I wanted to go outside, to which I said yes for some fresh air after the long school day. So of course I got my shoes on and went out with her to where my baby brother started playing with some of his toys that he had brought out with him. As he continued to play with his toys, me and my mom talked for a minute or two as she waited for the bus, and then I wandered away, neurodivergent thing lol, over into my backyard towards all the landscape I described earlier, walking slowly fidgeting with my fingers, again neurodivergent thing lol, to where I eventually made my way over to the fence that separated my house and all the landscapes I had described earlier. I continued to fidget with my fingers and walked about 2 feet along the fence to where I suddenly snapped out of my fidgety trance, which I'm glad I did, looked up, to my left, and bam, that's where I see them, the image that still plagues my mind today with so many questions, and even though I know what I saw, people don't believe me. It was a group of what seemed to be around 8 people that were all pale white, and I don't just mean clothing, I mean everything of them, not a speck of color. And although a part of me saw them as somewhat human, they didn't look to have any arms, and they didn't seem to be doing anything in particular, just walking around, which was strange as no one had access back there besides me and my family, which really alarmed me. I stood there for about 30 seconds to really try and process what I was seeing, though at the time it scared me so much I ran back to my mom on our front porch. My heart was beating faster than you could blink. Eventually I arrived back at my mom sitting on our porch waiting for the bus, which still hadn't arrived with my baby brother still playing with his toys, to where she was visibly confused as to what was wrong to where she asked, and I explained the situation to her. I guess you could say she was skeptical at first as she thought I was joking with her until she picked up my baby brother and followed me to where it happened, and this is where people always think I'm crazy, especially her. When we arrived, I pointed to her where it had happened, but they were just gone. Just like that, in 1 minute they're gone. At this point she really did think I was joking, so she went back over to the front porch to continue to wait for the bus, to which I went with her, still having so many questions plaguing my mind, and they still are. For the next few days I told the story to a few family members, though they all thought I was joking, one even saying that my imagination would make a good fairy tale, and ever since they told me that, the incident just kind of left my mind, although I know what I saw. This was until around last January, when, as I started to delve deeper into cryptozoology, I discovered the Fresno nightcrawlers, and as I started to look at pictures of them, the incident started to come back to me almost as if I had discovered something ancient. Everything had come back to me regarding that situation, though I kept it to myself just for it to linger in my mind. I rarely talk about this, as I still get cold chills when telling stories. 10 years ago, I used to run quite a bit after work. It was late enough in the fall where it was getting dark by 6 p.m. EST, and there was a cool breeze with lots of leaves on the ground. The area I ran in was close to the Tennessee River and had several small, 2 to 3 cars, parking areas by the water. Also, part of the area you run over are Cherokee burial mounds. I was finishing my run, last 5 miles, and something caught my attention in my peripheral vision. In one of the small parking areas, there was a van. Next to that van, though, was a 7-8 foot tall shadow looking in the windows. I was estimating height as I was across the street, but it was bent over looking into the windows. It was darker than night, if that makes sense. It then pivoted and looked at me. I took off in a full sprint and definitely ran the fastest half mile I have ever run. I drove back by it on the way out, and only the van was there. Any ideas what it could have been? I was skeptical about all of this stuff before that night, but I can't make sense of it. Me and a friend went to the woods to barbecue over a fire, as we do now and then all year. I live in Stockholm, and the woods we go to lie next to a lot of apartments. I have always been very into the Sasquatch/Bigfoot subject, and I know it is real. We have them here in Sweden as well. What people refer to as trolls here is the same as Bigfoot or Sasquatch, the same being different names. However, me and my friend went into the woods to a specific place we always go to when we make our fire, barbecue, and drink beer. After a while, when the fire was started, I grabbed a big stick, went to a tree, and knocked it hard 3 times. 10 minutes pass, And further into the woods I see this orb just appear and hovers about 3 meters above the ground. I stare at it, and I think to myself that is not a person with a flashlight or anything like that at all. The orb just hovered at the same spot and then disappeared, and I thought to myself, wrong shit is about to go down. Time passes and darkness has fallen over the woods. Me and my friend sit in front of the fire where we hear a weird noise, and my friend says, "Did you hear that?" I looked over the fire into the darkness and saw dark yellow eyes glowing in the darkness staring at us. I said, "Do you see those glowing eyes staring at us?" "Yes," he answered, "that is not a human or an animal." I said, and he agreed. We stared at it for 30 seconds when it suddenly moved away, almost floating, leaving traces from the glowing eyes. I was creeped out. 1 week later we go to the same spot, and it's dark. The fire is lit when we suddenly start to hear a tree break from the woods. A thick tree breaks, it starts from the left and moves to the right and circles around us. The tree keeps moving around us and gets closer and gets quiet for a couple of minutes. All of a sudden, 15 meters to the right of us, a big ducking tree break echoes through the woods, and I go holy shit, WTF, and it gets quiet. Behind me and my friend stood this 5-meter long tree, and the fire was on a big rock, maybe 1 meter above the ground. Suddenly something appears behind us and smashes the tree with the tree log. This thing broke in half minutes before. It hit the tree so hard that it fell to the ground and swung back up again. Me and my friend jumped back like 2 meters. This thing hit the upper part of the tree, which means that it was huge and strong as hell. My friend turns on the flashlight and looks around, we see nothing, and it's quiet. The thing is that when me and my friend walked around in the woods, we were loud as hell, twigs breaking and tons of other sounds under our feet. But this thing moves fast silently around us, that's the scary part as well. I was scared as hell, so I left the fucking woods. I like the woods, but I get nervous and scared when I wander too far into the woods alone. One other time when I was walking on a track, 2 stones came flying from above and landed in front of me. I looked up into the trees and saw this transparent shaped thing in the trees, and then it just disappeared. Last weekend, my 5-year-old and I went tent camping in the Uintas northeast of Utah. The weather was overcast. By the time we got done paddleboarding, we made our way back to camp. Once we got back to camp, I couldn't shake this feeling of unease. I mostly shrugged it off, thinking I was overthinking the safety of my child. One thing to point out, there was a trailer and a truck close to us, but I never saw anyone throughout our experience from there. At around 8 p.m., we started our campfire, we roasted brats and ate snacks. During this time, I would think I heard a crack or subtle movement and believed it was just the embers popping. Once the sun finally set, I noticed it was completely pitch black outside the reach of our campfire, light most likely due to the overcast weather. At this point I decided it was time to pack up our food and take it to the car, but I had this sudden feeling that I was being watched, and I decided to turn my headlamp light on. I faced 30 degrees to the right of me. About 40 to 50 feet from us, I see a small bush-like tree. I want to explain that this small bush-like tree was not thick or sturdy enough for something big to lean on or climb onto, and above the tree standing behind it, I see 2 big circle white eyes with a hint of purple staring straight at me. The animal/creature was far enough from the glow of fire that I couldn't see a silhouette of a body, but it was close enough that it was odd behavior, and it was only seconds from us if it ran towards us. My first thought was it was a bear standing on its hind legs just being curious. It looked to be 8 feet tall or so. As I had my light facing the creature, who was abnormally close to our campsite, I grabbed my kiddo and bear spray and told my kid there's a bear behind a tree and assured him we would be fine. This creature just watched us intently. Suddenly, a few seconds later, my intuition screamed, "Get out now." I then started walking backwards towards my car and told my kid to walk slowly with me. The creature made no movement and tilted its eyes on us as we moved away until my light could no longer reach it. I can't explain this new type of fear I was experiencing, it was unnatural. I believe prioritizing my boy's safety allowed me to get us to the car in a much more composed manner. Once in the car, we waited 30 minutes to see if it would come into the campsite to look for food. But nothing happened. I thought perhaps it left and we could sleep in the car to be safe. I decided that I am going to try and grab blankets from the tent, put out the fire, and we can pack out first thing in the morning. I thought wrong. The campsite from the car was about 150 feet away. To the right of us were big trees, and to the left of us is tall grass/brush. I get out of the door and turn my headlamp on. My light shines towards the brush, and laying low in the brush, I see the white eyes again staring up at me. I decided to try and act big and yell out at the creature, but it made a move towards me, which in return made me jump back into the car in reverse. I tried to shine my car lights towards it and couldn't see anything. I decided to find help. I drive down and find a friendly fellow dad camper who is delighted to help me pack things up to leave. He arrives with his truck and a much brighter flashlight. As I am packing, he sees the eyes and mentions there's 2 of them. He states they're not moose, deer, or cougars, and if it's a bear, it's really odd behavior, and he doesn't know exactly what they are. I face towards where he is shining his light, and I see a second pair of white eyes. At this point, I am terrified. One of them is standing tall, while the other is lower. This time they are much further back, as if they now know there's a new reach limit to the light devices being used. It wasn't until the lower set of eyes decided to stand up and be much taller than the first one, looking monstrous. This made my new friend very uneasy, and he quotes, "This has got me on edge, let's just throw everything in your car and leave." The whole time we are packing out, I would catch these creatures creating a perimeter around us. They just walked around the campground in circles, waiting for something, it seemed. I tried to think of rational possible theories. But the more I think about it, the more I can't shake the feeling this could have been SW or something else. They were too smart, intuitive, bold, and scary to act like normal wildlife. Any thoughts about these creatures would mean the world to me. Thank you if you listen to this. I was getting goosebumps retelling the story. I have an experience to tell. And I need some information about it all. Similar sighting or lore would be appreciated. Talking about it gives me overwhelming fear and anxiety, like I'm being watched. So it all started when I was around 2015. I was 13 at the time. I was pulling an all-nighter because of my insomnia, and I've never really seen the sunrise. It was around 4:30 to 5 a.m. in the state of Florida in the city of Orlando. And when I opened my curtain and looked out the window, I saw a figure hunched over, kind of sitting on my neighbor's fence. It's almost pitch black in nature and had a shadow even in the semi-moonlight. Wings with enormous, glowing red eyes. Staring right at me felt like it was reaching to my soul. Naturally, I fled, being the confused 13-year-old I am, to let my parents know and take a look, but when they came to the window, it was gone. Who figured? No activity started until a month later, chilling in my same room and looking back outside the window to see if there was ice on my window. It was winter around that time, and I looked at the moon again and saw what I figured was the same figure, but it was hard to tell because he was in the sky and in the same line in the moon, and I heard a screech like a roar but higher toned. After that, there hasn't been another sighting yet, but when I tell the story to people, it feels like he's right behind me watching. What do you all think? Because if it is a cryptid, I don't know what it could be in my region. When I was a young teen, approximately 14, I lived in a small village in the southern UK, near a place locally known as Devil's Island. In truth, it was an island of trees in a farmer's field. I walked past it daily and once saw what I thought to be a person standing over there, which was strange as I couldn't think of any reason for someone to be over there. I was young. What really weirded me out though was the brown robes he was wearing and the fact that he was staring at me as I walked across the field. I could have dismissed it as a weird guy or even just a ghost, but when I was halfway across the field, I blinked, and suddenly it was a huge dark shape on all fours like a giant cat with dark red eyes and started running at me. I turned and ran towards the other end of the field along the footpath and fell just before the end, where the local church and old monastery used to be. I felt claws across my back then. I seriously thought I was done, but after a few seconds, the pain and fear vanished. I stood up and was fine, no rips or scratches. The only creature I've ever seen has stayed with me. What did I see? A couple of weeks ago on the western side of Wisconsin, along a gravel road that was lightly wooded, I saw a shaded figure walking nonchalantly across the road into the woods, almost perfectly invisible except for when it passed a tree on the edge of the road. Between the whiteness of the freshly fallen snow and the dark bark of the tree, I would have completely missed it. Unfortunately, for whatever it is, the shadow turned darker than the tree bark and was more pronounced against it. I passed by that point and have been thinking about it ever since. Last summer we were out in the woods about 5 miles from our house just taking a hike and fishing. Blowing off a little steam after work. So this would be about 6 to 7 in the evening. As we were getting ready to leave, my son saw something that looked to him like a human/deer thing. It appeared to walk on 2 legs. I did not see it but could hear something running through the trees. My son is 16, so not a little kid that would make up stories. Since then, we have talked to 2 others who have seen something like it. All from the same area. I should note that this area is known for Bigfoot activity. So much so that we used to have a local researcher that was funded and reported to Jeff Meldrum at ISU. So, what is this thing? Is it good or bad? Are we crazy? One night I saw something weird. I was in bed at about 12 midnight. There are some windows right beside my bed, and they were open. I was lying in bed and gazing at the sky. I love the night sky. Soon, I saw a humanoid-like figure slowly flying left to right in a direction slightly inclined upward from the horizontal. I was surprised at first, so I looked very carefully at it. It was black, most probably, and I could clearly see its outline since the sky was not that dark that night. It looked vertically longer, like a human but with a slightly irregular shape. It was pretty close to my window, like 100 meters or so, or maybe farther away, but that's what it seemed. The weirdest part of it is that it was moving with a highly uniform speed. Like no acceleration, uniform speed, and in a straight line, thus more like uniform velocity. I stared at it for a few seconds and realized it's not something normal. I quickly looked away because I didn't want eye contact. I was thinking about what I should do, and I feared it might come for me because I've seen it. I woke my parents up and told them what I saw. Because if they'd find me dead in the morning, they'd at least know what happened. I went back to sleep. Haven't seen it since. Description: it was humanoid-like, vertically longer, upright. I was flying in the sky with an abnormally uniform velocity. It was about the size of a human, albeit bigger. It kind of looked like the shape a witch sitting on a broom would have. I know this sounds ridiculous, but I ducking saw exactly what I've said here. So my name is Nicholas, and I'm 14, and I always believed in paranormal anomalies and such. I live in Canada, so Bigfoot and Wendigo are my favorite paranormal beings, but I'm not afraid of them because I'm a Christian and go to a Christian school. So last year I went to a Bible camp. They had canoeing, shooting bottles, making shelters, and church. It's fun, and I decided to take the outdoor fun week. So we got to the camp. It had a cafeteria, bunk bed cabins, and more. It was not fenced and was close together, which made me feel safe. So after my first night, we decided to play fugitive. It's a game where you have 2 cops and 1 main fugitive. When you come in 2 feet of a person, they must give you a hint to where the main fugitive is. They only have 3 arrests, which are hints. So I got picked for the main fugitive and started running into the woods to find a hiding place. We all had radios to make sure we were safe. I found a pine tree, which I climbed up and hid in. They had 5 minutes to find me. 2 minutes in, I hear my cabin master say game over, come back from the woods, not on the radio, which is odd, but I listened and went into the deeper part of the woods, and when I heard him say Nicholas come in, the game is over. I ran towards the voice, and then the radio beeped. Fugitive was not found. Come back to the cafeteria for lunch. I froze in my place, thinking about what was happening at this point. Crying, and then I heard sticks breaking and teeth chattering like echolocation or something of that sort, and I remembered Wendigo's toy with people or their prey, and I made the decision to run as fast as I could to the cafeteria. I started running as fast as I could. I felt weak, but my heart was in my throat, and I heard leaves behind me rustle. I finally got to the cafeteria and told my friends and cabin master what happened, and I got my parents to come and pick me up, and I went home, and to this day I don't go to Bible camp in fear of what that Wendigo or thing would do to me. Also, I live in the Northwest Territories, where the Wendigo is a common occurrence and such of the sort. I'm glad to share my story here to r/paranormal, and it is real, but it's fine if you don't think it is. I believe God saved me that day, but anyway, have a good day or night. This encounter isn't mine, but it is my partner's. She has spoken to me many times about this when we exchange weird/scary encounters we've experienced. Hers are always way more exciting than mine, given that she sort of attracts this type of stuff. For this, we'll call my partner A. A was about 14 to 15 years old when all this went down. Living in New Mexico, we aren't strangers to weird sightings and whatnot, skinwalkers, spirits, etc., but it's still very frightening. She lived in a trailer park outside of Farmington and in the middle of Kirtland, if that makes sense. This trailer park was practically in the middle of nowhere next to the hills, as well call them, and more specifically for her because her trailer was in the very last row of the trailer park. It was next to a little playground, which then led to empty hills. That'll be important for later. Before the whole sighting she had, there were some weird occurrences prior to that. This all happened around February to June in 2015. I would hear taps on her window, specifically 3 loud taps like someone was banging on her on it. She said that you could tell it was still a little tap since she could hear a nail or fingernails, if you will. One night while staying up late and playing video games, June eventually got sick and tired of hearing those taps every single night around 1 to 2 a.m. She had decided to look out her window to see what it was. She thought it could have been a tree or maybe a random druggie, but, oh boy, no, it wasn't. After she lifted the makeshift curtain blanket, she didn't have blinds, saw a hunched gray-skinned humanoid thing. It was very thin and bony, having very long appendages. The way it was hunched was as if someone was sneaking outside their friend's window, tapping it to get their friend's attention without getting caught. Its arm was retracting back as if it had just finished tapping. Its hands had 3 fingers, long and bony, just like everything else. The best way A can describe the way they looked would be to think of a long finger that's sharp at the end, like a wooden stake that would be used to kill a vampire. Not exactly like claws, but not like a human finger either. Kind of like Salad Fingers, I think that's his name. Its face looks very stretched, like it would fall off at any point. Its mouth was stuck into this creepy grin/grimace that perfectly showed its sharp, jagged teeth. Think of it like a shark tooth or thick broken beer bottle glass. It didn't really have a nose, just slits in the middle like Voldemort. The eyes were big, hollow holes, black and just an endless void, that covered up the majority of the upper part of its head. When it saw A, it stood up to its full height and stepped, not jumped, over her 7-foot backyard fence and walked towards the playground I had mentioned earlier. The whole time it hobbled in that direction, multiple dogs in that area were going haywire, barking and growling like an intruder was walking about. A was freaked out, obvious, and stepped away from the window and went about the rest of her night terrified. A couple days later, specifically the day she turned 15, I heard another tap on her bedroom window that night, which she had ignored. A couple hours later, I woke up to the sound of something scratching her closet door from the inside. A at this time had no animals in the house. Hearing the scratching, she booked it out of her room and slept in the living room that night. No incidents had occurred for a week after that until one day. A was home alone. Her sister and mom had gone grocery shopping and wouldn't be home for a few hours. Being a teenager home alone, she was playing her video games in her room when she heard a voice somewhere in the house that sounded like her sister was calling her name. So assuming that they were back from grocery shopping, I left her room thinking her sister was calling her to help put up the groceries, but she found no one in the house. The car was still gone. I went back to her room, dismissing what she heard and chalking it up to her imagination. 30 minutes later, she heard it again. Previously, while looking, she checked every single room besides one. Her sister's room, which always unsettled her, and she was told to keep out of it obviously, so she didn't bother looking in there. That's where the voice was coming from. As soon as A stepped through the door and turned on the light, she felt an unsettling presence in the air. The voice called out again, and it sounded garbled and echoey, kind of like it was reverbed. I automatically knew it was coming from the bathroom, specifically the shower. So she closed the bathroom door and walked backwards, making sure to keep her eyes on the door to make sure it wouldn't swing back open, and whoever this was wasn't charging at her. Turning off the bedroom light, eyes still trained on that door, and shutting the bedroom door as well. Turning around, I noticed that the back door was wide open. Her stomach dropped, and a chill ran up her spine. Nausea bubbled up in her gut as everything was setting in. Someone was in the house. Or rather something. She slammed the back door shut and bolted back to her room, locking her door behind her. Being so mortified, I put headphones in to drown out any more noise of whatever there could make and resumed her video games as a distraction. That was the last encounter A has ever had with whatever this thing was. She thinks the creature outside her window was the one in her closet scratching the door and house, mimicking her sister. I don't doubt that, but in my head, the mimicking thing sounds more like skinwalker. I'm Native American and have grown up with those stories as my dad has had some experience with them, so naturally that's what it sounds to me, but I don't know. I also believes it could be some extraterrestrial being, like an alien or something. Nothing else has happened besides a few unrelated supernatural encounters for A, but she feels terrified if anything reminds her of this experience. It sends her into a more primal fear, fight or flight mode that verges on a borderline panic attack. Every time I hear this story, personally, it makes me want to SHT bricks. I call it white. It was seen by me and 2 friends. It's pale white and shiny, like a bike reflector. Its eyes are yellow and shiny. It is humanoid. At first it was the size of a 4 or 5-year-old, but in a few months it is now at least 10 feet tall. It lives in the woods. The first time I saw it, it was hiding behind a tractor front bucket that was detached. I glanced at it and saw a small white face with yellow shiny eyes looking at me with its mouth open like a mouth breather, no offense. I screamed, and my cousin also saw it. My cousin and I went through the woods looking for it. It is ominous but also peaceful there. The reason it is kind of creepy is that I have never seen bugs besides fireflies in there, or birds for that matter. One time, we found an army man hanging from a tree branch with a single spider thread that felt threatening. The way we normally see it is a few dozen feet into the woods, just like a white silhouette. The second close encounter is this. Cousin A, same as last time, and I had a campfire going. I didn't know because I was grabbing wood, but he went inside to poop. While I was grabbing wood, I thought I saw him crouched in the dark out of a firelight near the firewood stack. It was man-shaped and gray. This might be a different entity. I said, "Come, help me get some wood," and then it ran away while still crouched. Its speed was similar to a sprint, maybe faster. Later that night, we saw a white shape standing in the woods looking at us. The scariest and last noteworthy story is this. Once again, we had a campfire. At this point, spotting it has become a game between me, Cousin A, and Cousin B. We had a flashlight and torch and stood at the edge of the woods looking for it. Someone pointed out a huge white shape, at least 7 high and 6 long. I think it was hunched over because the shape was like that. I pointed my light at it, and it promptly turned towards us. At that point, we ran back to the fire. Cowards, I know. We occasionally hear footsteps and feel as though someone is watching us. For some context, I'm 21, was about 18 at the time of the sighting, and looking at working in ecology and wildlife management for indigenous nations. I'm an avid hunter and fisherman. I grew up on a ranch in southern Alberta. I have seen a lot of things. This was a first. I currently live in Port Coquitlam, which is not far from Harrison Lake. Harrison Lake is commonly known as the Sasquatch hotspot of North America, and as such, there's been many sightings in this area of BC. It was March 17, 2020, at around 8 a.m., and I was out for a drive from Port Coquitlam to EC Manning Provincial Park. I decided to take a small detour near Stave Lake, a slightly smaller lake, not too far from Harrison, and the power center/dam beside it. I was driving alongside the floodplains on the way up, and I slowed down when I saw what looked like a bear sitting down, eating grass. We don't have grizzlies in the area and haven't for decades, but I could see the usual silver-tipped look they usually have. We only have black bears, so I was curious. I stopped the car, sat on the hood, and watched it for a little bit. I grabbed a pair of binoculars and looked at it from about 100 meters off. It wasn't grizzly. It stood up, turned its whole body around, and looked at me. The proportions were off, arms were too long, torso too wide. There was no neck. The head looked similar to a gorilla's, but not quite. It had these large eyes and a wide nose, sort of like a person's, but again, not quite. I got in my car and got out of there immediately. If I had to guess, it was about 7.5 to 8 tall, 3.5 to 4 wide, and probably about 600 pounds or so. I've told my grandmother about it and have mentioned it in 1 or 2 Sasquatch groups, but that's about all. I'm a 19-year-old female living in Pennsylvania with my parents and 2 of my sisters. We live in a pretty rural area, and there isn't much that goes on out here. I listen to your stories every morning at work and always wish I had a scary story of my own to share. Well, tonight I got my scary story. To preface the story a bit, me and my older sister have only been hiking one time before this experience, so we are by no means pros. We do, however, always bring some items for safety, such as pocket knives, flashlights, and a medical kit. For this story, I will not use my sisters' names for the sake of their anonymity. My older sister will be called M, and my younger sister will be referred to as F. So, today is F's birthday, and she has never been hiking before, so we figured we would bring her on a little hiking trip to take advantage of the beautiful weather. The area we hiked in earlier is actually part of the state game lands. Hikers are permitted on the mountain trails during the off-season of hunting. However, not many folks know about this spot because there are no signs or anything until you walk the mile or so into the woods. By then you reach a small parking lot of sorts, which is always empty. There are 2 main trails that are marked with the occasional blue dot on a nearby tree. If not for these spray paint dots to mark the path, you might not even know it is a trail because of how little use these paths see. Probably not the best first hiking spot for a couple of newbies like us, I know, but it's super close to us and makes for a quiet hike with lots of scenery. So we decided to once again hike that trail because we were somewhat familiar with it. We were decently excited and ready to have a nice relaxing hike through the mountain and hopefully get some cool pictures. We started walking from our house all the way to the bottom of the mountain, where we would begin our hike. On our way there, we were telling F about the trail and how beautiful it was. M then expresses concern that there could be animals of all sorts nearby because the area isn't normally frequented by many humans. I figured there would be animals, of course, it is the woods after all, but I never imagined anything like what I'm about to describe in this story. After walking for about 15 minutes, we reached the parking lot. M led the way with me in the middle, and F followed closely behind. The first couple of steps onto the trail require you to walk up a small but steep hill. M crested the hill before F and I, and as she did, we heard a pretty loud rustling noise off to our left. I naturally chalked the noise up to some birds or maybe a squirrel messing around in a tree. But then, Em suddenly stopped in her tracks, causing F and I to also pause briefly. Just as I was about to ask what the problem was, Em calmly said, "Turn around, guys." Me and F just looked at her confused, not understanding what she meant. I just started asking why, and she said probably the scariest thing I ever heard. "There is something over there. Run." Now, that sentence was a lot more scary to me and F because we know Em very well, and she doesn't scare easily. So to hear the clear panic in her voice as she ordered us to run away from something that neither F nor I saw was terrifying. Em and F immediately began sprinting back down the small hill, while I remained in my position. I quickly looked behind me, but I saw nothing. I did hear something though. I was still very confused because I hadn't actually seen anything, and Em never said what she saw. I ran over to Em and F, who were waiting for me just before the entrance to the parking lot. I think part of the reason I hesitated running right away was because I thought Em might be exaggerating a little. I should have known by the look on her face that she was not messing around. I had a miniature hatchet multi-tool and a pocket knife on my belt, and you better believe I had them prepared. I had no idea what I was expecting, but I knew that anything that might run out of the woods behind us was going to get a face full of stainless steel. When I reached my sister's, I asked Em what exactly we were running from. She just told us to keep moving as she constantly looked back at the trail we had just come from. She even told us to jog just in case it was following us. We did. After maybe jogging a quarter mile or so, Em finally told us what we were running from. She said she looked in the direction of the noise we had all heard, and what she saw was a gray figure, hunched over about 10 feet off the trail. She described it as being at least the height of F, who is around 5 feet 6 inches. She said it looked to be bipedal, but she didn't stick around long enough to take in every detail about the figure. However, she did note that it looked as if it was shuffling towards us. I believe that's what made her get us out of there so fast. She must have feared that we were being chased. Now, I never have believed in monsters of cryptids or anything, but Em said she honestly has no idea what the thing was. We don't have any type of animal in PA that matches that description, at least as far as I know. I know that black bears stand on their hind legs sometimes, but they are not gray, and it didn't sound big enough to be a bear. The only other thing it might have been is a human. But why would someone hear us obviously distressed and not call out to let us know they were there and not a threat? Unless the person was not there as a friendly hiker. Possibly a person living on the mountain, maybe someone doing drugs and were afraid they would get busted. I don't know. That seems to be the only logical explanation. However, I'm not entirely convinced that it was a human presence. I don't believe in Bigfoot or anything, but who knows? By the time we were almost home, Em told us that she used to go to the bus stop with 2 of the neighbor kids years ago. She said they would always talk about a mystery animal that they would see walking around in the woods near their house, which is very close to the state game lands. At first she didn't believe them because she had never seen such a thing. But one time, when the neighbor kid's grandmother was with Em at the bus stop, Em asked about this mystery animal. The grandmother is and has always been a religious person and didn't seem to be the type of person to believe in something like her grandkids had explained. But to Em's surprise, the grandmother said she had also witnessed the mystery animal lurking around. What's more, our house is just across the lawn from where our neighbors claim to spot this unknown creature. I'm not sure if these two experiences are related, besides, that was years ago. However, could the figure Em encountered in the woods tonight be the mystery animal? Maybe it was a human or an animal. Who knows for sure? But what I do know is, I don't think we'll be hiking on the state game lands anytime soon. This story is from the time when me and my boyfriend started dating. We are both into supernatural things, weird things, and creepy things. It was December 2021. We are from a city in Romania called Botoșani. Usually when we were hanging out, we were driving for hours, sometimes parking, and just watching videos. In this particular night we decided to go to a village 20 minutes away, Mandrești. It was around 12 a.m. We usually were hanging out only at night because of work and school. We planned to park in a field, put a blanket in the trunk, and stay there watching the city lights. We have been there before, and we felt some things, like being watched, but decided that we were paranoid and didn't think much after. We did the same with the other things we saw on our dates. Anyway, we arrived at the field and parked the car with the trunk facing the field and the dashboard facing the exit. We got out and put the blanket in the trunk. I want to mention that I get scared and spooked easily. I always feel scared in places that I don't know very well. I started to feel like something was wrong and we shouldn't be there, but I ignored the feeling and proceeded to sit in the trunk. As I looked to the lights of the city, I started to also make a human figure out of the dark field. I asked my boyfriend to come closer and look. He didn't see it at first. It was when I got frightened and started to get in the car that he saw it. He got scared too and got in the car quickly, telling me that the figure was coming towards us. I can't remember if we left immediately or not, but I think we did. I can remember because we returned to that field many times since. The figure that we saw was a tall, black, fog-like figure. When I say tall, I mean like a man and a half. We didn't see it since, and there is one detail that I can't remember for sure, one because of the panic, and two because we had many situations like this one, not only encounters but also just moments when we felt like we were stalked, we felt like we shouldn't be in certain places. And before anyone says that we really shouldn't be in certain places, we know that, and most of our stories happened in really random places. When we go to more sacred places, we are respectful and take precautions. Anyway, I can't remember if one of us saw or felt like this figure was watching us, and when I say watching, I mean like it had glowing eyes. However, it might have been only our imagination or the city lights that gave us the impression of eyes. Also, it was not a man, because if it was, he would have come to the car and told us to leave or banged in the windows until we left. My boyfriend just told me one thing that happened the same night, and for some reason I was thinking it happened another time. So we left the field, and as soon as we got on the road, we noticed a spot on the road. I parked the car, my boyfriend got out first and looked. He said it was blood, but I didn't believe him, so I got out to see for myself. There was blood. The thing is that it looked as if it had fallen from above, if that makes sense. The road that we were on has trees on one side and the other, but not on this exact spot because there was the entrance to the field. Also, it couldn't have been a car that killed some animal that was crossing the road because there was no animal and no cars have passed since we arrived. No lights, no engine sounds, nothing. What do you think it was? Has anyone had similar encounters? It was late summer, and my mom and I had decided we should go out for a spontaneous hike. We did our research and found one that said it was a 4-mile round trip. Sounded easy enough. We got up early that morning and began our trek. The entire forest had a horrible vibe, even my mom picked up on it, and she's never been into any of the paranormal / etc. We've been walking for hours now, and this forest just seemed to get weirder and weirder. We had plenty of water and food, so I really can't say if we were just dehydrated or tired. We began to hear singing in the woods, and we stopped and stared at each other. We had to be miles into the woods by now. Our step counter says we have well surpassed the promised 4 miles. Where the hell would singing be coming from out here? We just looked at each other and began laughing. I remember her saying, "No way," shaking her head, and carrying on. It's been quite some time now, and we haven't encountered another person on this trail. Suddenly this man walking really fast surpasses us and rounds a bend behind a rocky hill, so we couldn't see him anymore. He said no words, he just came up behind us and darted past. Again, me and my mom laughed and envied his athleticism, but we rounded the bend ourselves to find that he was completely gone. Out of sight. The path after that bend was fairly straight, and you could see far ahead of you, so there is absolutely no way he would have been able to clear that area that fast. This time my mom stops and says, "You gotta be ducking kidding me." We're thoroughly freaked out after this. Eventually we reach the peak, and after walking that long, you'd think someone would probably want to stay there for a while and enjoy the view. Well, we pretty much got to the top, looked, then left. We never discussed it, but I could tell we were both uncomfortable and just wanted to get out of here. We're maybe halfway back through this trail now, and the sun is beginning to set. We're moving fast to get out of here. Our step counter said that we hiked 10 miles compared to the 4. As the forest got darker, I began to hear leaves crunching behind us. I reluctantly turned around and noticed a buck several yards away. We hurried along as to not disturb it further, but then I began noticing something. It was following us from a distance. It did so almost like a predator, hiding and peeking. I tell my mom we're being followed by that deer, and we're pretty much at a jog now. The buck would not let us go. I would sometimes notice that it would catch up and follow just beside us. It always remained several yards away, though. Always lurking, head down. I've lived out in the country my whole life and have seen all the deer you can imagine. I've never been followed by one like this. This seemed more than just curiosity, it felt horrible, predatory. I felt like I was in danger. Always hearing those footsteps behind me, the feeling of being watched. Clearly we made it out unharmed, but I really wonder if it actually intended to harm us or if it was just ushering us out of the forest. All in all, it was a freaky experience. Something is up with those woods. Not my story, but a friend in my PLT during ITB on the East Coast during Defense Week, while they were doing their patrol class, everyone heard a scream. But apparently it sounded really ducked up, human, but not human, if that makes sense. The instructors called up on the radio, asking who it was. All of them said it wasn't any of them. Instructors said there are Native American burial grounds nearby, not sure it's true. I think it's a lie to freak out the students, but I'm not sure I'm on the West Coast. But later that night, while my buddy was in his fighting hole around 03, a deer came out of the woods in front of his fighting hole, about 25 meters by 50 meters. He said it was hard to see but could clearly tell it was a deer. Our NVGs aren't the best. Something about the deer looked odd and small out of nowhere. The ducker stood up on 2 of his own words, that shit was a solid 6,4 when it stood up, and sprinted into the forest like a human. The 2 holes adjacent to him said they had seen the same thing and were shaken up. They asked the instructors if it was them playing a prank, and they responded, "No, we weren't even here last night, we just left y'all." I lived in Waynesboro, Virginia, for about 5 years, less than 10 miles to the BRP North entrance and Skyline Drive South entrance. I used to take bike rides along SD all the time and always kept a year-long membership. Only in the day, though. Just to frame the story. One night, I was having a particularly difficult time settling in for bed, so I decided to start up the bike and ride up to the first overlook on Skyline, only about a mile inside the park. It was about 11 p.m. when I got up there, and pitch black. I killed the bike and felt immediately uncomfortable. I'm not a guy that gets spooked in the dark. Truthfully, I prefer the dark in most situations. You can see people before they see you, you are practically invisible unless someone is looking for you, and I find the natural privacy comforting. Not up there, though. It was a thick, oppressive darkness, worse than anything I experienced outside of a cave and worse than any moonless night on the Appalachian Trail. The darkness immediately hit me hard. There's nothing up here besides wildlife, I reassured myself internally. I had my .44 mag revolver, from what I lived/hiked in the Pacific NW greater than bear country and all that jazz, tucked into my CCW holster, so I knew I definitely outmatched anything that could be up there. 2-legged snakes included. So I sat in the dark, leaning against the bike for a while and looking at the few lights I could see in the valley below. I managed about 10 minutes before I physically felt the hair raise on the back of my neck. I only did 27 months in Iraq, but I remembered that precise feeling, someone was watching me. Something bad was coming. It was the same sensation I would get before IDF came in, or the shooting started somewhere nearby. I'm no psychic or whatever, but it's a common thing among vets with any time under their belt. Ask them about it. You can feel hateful eyes on you. The overlook was a sheer drop, or nearly so I wasn't concerned about anything popping up in that direction, but the mountainside, and thick, untamed woods, were behind me. I started thinking about methed out dudes creeping the Appalachian Trail, bears, and the like. The ad is no stranger to random violence. Still feeling creeped out, I took up a seat on the waist-high stone wall that marked the overlook ledge, facing the woods. Again, I can't emphasize how dark it was. But you might say, why not turn on the bike and use the lights? It'll at least help you see what's close. True, but my bike is loud, and the last thing I wanted was attention. Plus, the light would just night blind me to anything just out of view, and the noise would obscure any stealthy sounding creeping going on. So, no thanks. I'll watch and listen for a bit. I sat in the dark for another 10 minutes or so, anxiety getting worse and worse. I heard a few things, but nothing out of the ordinary for a night in the woods. I decided to head home since the feeling wasn't going away. Like I said, I had a big bore on me, so anything playing games would be in for a powerful surprise if the games got stupid. Hopping onto my Suzuki, I started it up and rode off towards the gate. Now, anyone who lives in the country and rides a bike knows that wildlife is crazy active on roads that aren't traveled often at night. Being nighttime, and technically closed, I had to ride around a gate to get in. There were no other vehicles on the road at all. I hadn't seen a single other person since leaving Waynesboro proper. The speed limit was 30 miles per hour, but I clipped along at a meager 15 miles per hour to keep an eye out for deer and wildlife. It wouldn't do me any good to duck myself up in a wreck, only to lay there all night until someone happened to cross me in the morning. Then I saw it. The term almost deer is really fitting, not but quite accurate. It was like a deer that someone who had never seen a deer drew, but only after someone else described it to them. It stood on the left side of the road, mountainside, and I saw the eyes long before my headlight showed it fully. It was big, easily the biggest deer I've seen, and the lack of any horns that time in the year suggested that it was a doe. The head was almost bovine in shape but fixed to a deer's frame. The legs seemed too long in proportion to the body, think maned wolf proportions, and the body was extremely barrel-chested. I've always been creeped out by malformed wildlife, and this was no exception. Unfortunately, I had to get it moving, or risk passing within a few feet of it. I was not traveling another 30+ miles up the road in the other direction to leave through another gate in the middle of the night, and I wasn't getting close to it. Dangers of it spooking and running into the side of my cruiser aside, I didn't want to get near it at all. Stopping and putting my feet down about 30 away from it, I tried to frighten it away. I flashed my beams down to low, then back to high. Nothing. I revved the engine. Nothing. I honked the considerable horn, nada. Resting the bike on the kickstand, I left it idling and hopped off. I yelled at the thing, and it still didn't budge, so I started to the side of the road to grab something to toss near the deer, hoping to spot it that way. As soon as I crossed into the other lane, it rose up onto its hind legs. I froze, putting my hand on my gun. I wasn't about to get charged by an angry, confused, malformed doe. It took 2 jerky, unnatural steps towards the center of the lane on 2 legs and froze again, staring directly at me. It suddenly shook its head wildly like a dog with a toy, took another short step, and then hopped on 2 legs several times until it disappeared into the darkness on the right side of the road. I stepped back to the bike, mounted it, kicked up the kickstand, and turned the light towards the side of the road. On that side, there was a sheer drop off about 75 to 80 degrees compared to the roadway, and the ducking thing's head was just peeking over the edge, still looking at me. The drop off was about 40 to 50, so there's no way it was standing at the base of the mountainside. I cracked the throttle and beat the hell out of there, road wildlife be damned. After that, I never went back up on Skyline Drive at night alone. One time was enough. There are things we don't see out there. Or things that just visit for a while. Whatever it wasn't from around these here parts, in Hill Talk. It can go back to wherever it came from and stay there. About a humanoid creature from southwestern Siberia. The southwestern area of Siberia, located just north of central to eastern Kazakhstan, was known to Europe by the times of the ancient Greeks. In the lost work of Aristeas of Proconnesus, it is told the semi-historical Greek poet from Asia Minor journeyed east of the Riphean Mountains, the Urals, and found the Isidones, a Saka tribe. At the time, Iranian speakers like the Saka and Uralic speakers like the Mansi were the only inhabitants of the area, while much later migrating Turkic waves would assimilate the Iranian people and settle in the area while also intermixing with the Uralic tribes, leading to most modern pre-Russian inhabitants being Siberian Tatars, the remnants of the Golden Horde and the Khanate of Sibir, and Volga Tatars. The Isidones were believed to be at war with the Arimaspians. Due to not knowing the Saka language, Greeks assumed their name to mean one-eyed, as they thought it came from Scythian Arima one and Spau I. However, this etymology is totally inconsistent with any actual Iranian languages. This error originated from the Greek idea of Arimaspians being cyclopes. However, the Arimaspians, while not cyclopes, were not regular men either. Quoted from an article from Folklore, Volume 104, all the sources are presumed to derive ultimately from Aristeas. Aeschylus, Prometheus Bound, 803 ff., characterizes them as one-eyed horsemen. Herodotus agrees and adds that they steal the gold and that they drove the Scythians west. The only other writer to add more information is John of Tsetses, a late Byzantine writer who is generally acknowledged to have had access to earlier Greek sources that are now lost. He characterizes the Arimaspians as strong warriors, good horsemen rich in flocks of cattle and sheep and goats. They are one-eyed, shaggy with hairs, the toughest of men. The hairiness of the Arimaspians is confirmed by the unique Kellermes mirror, which appears to show 2 Arimaspians in the Gripomachy. In the mirror, although the Arimaspians are hirsute, they show no sign of monocularity. Removing the one-eye fallacy, it seems those people have human, Stian/Saka-like culture, but are also hairy and stronger than average. Obviously, they are far from the only hairy, bipedal creatures reported in the area. For example, in the not-so-far western Mongolia there is the Almaz. However, while still being bipedal and hairy, the Almaz is a much less human-like and much more Bigfoot-like creature. Quoted from the aforementioned article, reports of wild people in Central Asia may be found throughout history. A 13th century Armenian traveler reported that the desert was inhabited by naked wild men with horsehair on their heads. The breasts of the females were extremely large and pendant. Such a short description could point to the Almaz itself, known also for the extremely large, pendulous breasts of females, but since it calls them men, not half-human animals like satyrs, which is what ancient Greeks and Romans would have seen a bipedal ape as, since they did not have the concept of apes and of man being their relative, and satyrs themselves were likely based on relic bipedal primates now known in European fossil records, it may also rather point to actual humans with hirsute bodies. While the hirsute bodies were mentioned earlier, here they are even said to just have some crazy hairstyles, naked bodies, and a total lack of modern cultural elements. However, there is also the opposite possibility, quoted here from the same article. Almaz are said to live in association with the wild sheep and goats, in the same region as the wild horse, Przewalski's horse, and are said to suck mare's milk. It is a short step from believing that almases live commensally with the indigenous wildlife to believing that they, being anthropomorphic, have dominion over them. Personally, I do not believe Isodones could have seen the almas, basically an Asian Bigfoot, between horses and believed bipedal ape-like hominids were horse-mounted warriors, and how could the almas organize into an army and defeat a warlike Indo-European tribe? The Arimaspians must have been as intelligent as we are. However, not only Europeans, with the Arimaspians, and Turco-Mongolic peoples, with the almas, believed there were unknown, more or less human-like creatures in the area between southwestern Siberia, Central Asia, and western Mongolia. The aforementioned Kani Mansi believe their area, just north of southwestern Siberia and east of the Urals, is inhabited by the Menk, a supposedly Bigfoot-like creature with unusual characteristics. The Menk are known to cryptozoologists as marked hominids. This is a fake category created after a Menk individual from a mysteriously unknown area in the Ural region who was called Mekani, meaning the marked one, and had red hair over the body but also a patch of white hair or of naked depigmented skin on an arm. The patch is an individual trait, not a species-related trait. Here is the description of the Menk, quoted from Anomaly-N, a site about paranormal, but here most likely reporting actual data collected by Russian researchers. These omnivorous creatures are about 7 feet tall and have powerful bodies with muscular legs and shoulders. Their arms don't reach below the knees. Their heads, with large glowing eyes, rest low, so it appears as though they have no necks. The cryptids' rounded faces aren't ape-like. They are nocturnal, howl, and sometimes wear other animals' pelts. Marked hominids have been reported to approach villages of native people. Allegedly, the creatures have been known to trade with humans, communicating by hand gestures, and also, Mekani was covered with fur, as Volodya had described, and had glowing red eyes. He was about 6.5 feet tall. Mekani glanced at each person and made a soft sound like K. The legs were like a human's, not an ape's. There was no neck. Here we have something with no sagittal crest, shorter arms, long legs, and a reportedly not ape-like face. It lacks most of the characteristics distinguishing the Bigfoot-like paranthropine morphology, which is found in so many unknown primates over the world. However, its low resting head and possibly gorilla-like shoulder morphology could mean it is not truly human. The hairy body, the large glowing eyes, and the here not mentioned splayed feet are possibly the only real other non-human trait it has, and large eyes and splayed feet were also typical of previous Homo species. Its ability to trade and make clothes, contrasted with the hairiness of the body and compared with its geographic location, may point to a link with the aforementioned culture of apparently hairy but also human-level intelligent creatures known by Saka and later by Greek colonists as Arimaspians. According to our Greek sources, the Arimaspians lived on the eastern foothills of the Riphean/Ural Mountains, in southwestern Siberia. They drove the Isodones, a Saka tribe, south to Kazakhstan. In turn, the Isodones drove the Scythians west of the Urals. What the Arimaspians could have been. They could have been an Iranian tribe, or a culturally Iranianized Uralic tribe with Jomon/Ainu levels of body hairiness, which is not very hairy but still a bit more than Central Asians, or they could have been a different species of humans, if they are one and the same with the Menk, and if the Menk is not a subspecies of the Almas/Bigfoot from Mongolia, which would mean it is not the same as the Arimaspians themselves. Due to their mix of primitive and modern traits and their human intelligence, necessary to domesticate the horse, producing weapons, and waging war on the Saka, they may be the fabled but unlikely to still live relic Neanderthal. At least they are the most likely candidate for the title of relic Neanderthal/Denisova. But why so hairy when Neanderthals and archaic sapiens were only as hairy as we are? It could be a genetic defect born from inbreeding in small numbered populations. If it proved advantageous, it may have become a stabilized trait. Then the Neanderthals had short necks and large eyes, and the ones from Central Asia, who intermixed with the Denisova, averaged in height possibly up to 5 feet 10 inches, 4 inches taller than European Neanderthals. Not only that, we likely underestimate the average height of hominids when we extrapolate it from bone remains. This could validate the image of nigh human, red, brown, or black-haired with wild hairstyles, somehow hairy-bodied, naked, or pelt-clad savages mounted on domesticated horses the Saka had in mind when describing their northern neighbors. I believe that over time, they feralized and disappeared from most of their old range, becoming what is now known by the Mansi as the Menk. I saw a skinwalker once. At my landlady's house in southwest Colorado, she had her own parking area with an entrance, and I had my entrance across the backyard to the basement apartment. I went out one night, around 11-ish, to smoke a butt. I grabbed one out of my truck, and I saw a jackrabbit in the bushes near me. I could tell what it was by how long the ears were. I lit up my cigarette, and the stadium-style lights on my truck went out, and that's when I could see the jackrabbit's eyes were glowing. The only way I could describe the color is Mountain Dew green, like that sickly electric green color. And they really did glow. When the rabbit turned its head, I could see the light from its eyes reflecting off the vegetation of the bushes and stuff. Needless to say, I put out my cigarette and quietly went back inside. 2 other times I could hear the skinwalkers calling for help out in the sagebrush. Both times happened when I got home from work late and was walking across the back lawn to my apartment. The help calls are meant to lure people towards them. The calls were a man's voice, far off, but they weren't pleading for help. They were more like a suggestion, kind of hypnotic. Don't ever whistle at night in the Four Corners region. It may attract something you don't want, but believe me, they're around. When I was around 18 years old, I had been paying my ex-girlfriend at the time a visit and ended up losing track of time. It was around 1 in the morning at the time, and the dead of winter, I would say maybe late January or February. Whilst relaxing with my girlfriend, I neglected to pay attention to the weather or even look out the window at the time, considering darkness falls in Lancaster County by around 4:30 in the winter time. A very intense snowstorm rolled in and turned into a blizzard. After I did realize this, as well as the time, I concluded that for some reason the smartest move would be to leave and make the around 25 to 30 minute drive, even in clear weather, back to my house. Where I live is rather remote, the Amish capital of the world, if you are unfamiliar with Lancaster. But it is miles and miles of rolling hills, crop fields, and woods, with several small towns scattered about amongst them. About 10 minutes into my drive, I am having a very difficult time seeing through the endless onslaught of fluffy snow and the fact that I had left my glasses in my girlfriend's bedroom. I was driving at maybe 15 to 20 miles per hour considering the roads had not yet been plowed and were pretty slick. I got to a familiar portion of my drive, about 2 or 3 miles from my old high school. As I'm creeping down the country back roads, I can barely make out some sort of color in my low beams about 20 yards in front of me. Curiously, I angled my front end toward the thing I was seeing, which was also on my side of the road. As I got close enough to make out what I was seeing, I realized it was a hunched old woman. In some kind of blanket and a long skirt. Instantly, I was thinking this is my chance to be a good soldier and save a life. It was all of 5 degrees outside that night, and this old woman was very far into the nothingness of the land with no known homes around. I crept up next to her and rolled down my window. At this point she was no longer being illuminated by my headlights and was alongside my car, maybe around 6 feet outside of my passenger side window in the heavy snow. My initial thoughts are that this old woman must have dementia or Alzheimer's, some sort of neurological disease. I called out my window to her, "Excuse ma'am, are you in need of any help? What are you doing out here? You'll freeze." She didn't respond and, as a matter of fact, just kept slowly creeping forward through the snow. I used my phone flashlight now to get a little bit of a better view of her. She was wrapped in colorful blankets and had one sort of shrouding her head so I could not see her face. I also noted that it didn't seem like she had any shoes on. Once more, I asked, "Ma'am, why don't you let me take you somewhere warm and we can get you some help?" She stopped walking. I was already beginning to shiver from the cold wind blowing in through my window. The snow was still falling, just as heavy as ever. She just stood there, facing away from me. "Lady, can you hear me?" I inquired, not quite annoyed but confused. Almost as soon as I finished asking this, the old woman swiveled toward my window and stood straight up. This tiny, decrepit old woman became a presence like I had never seen. Suddenly the frail woman stood tall, taller than me, maybe 6 feet 3 or 4 inches. Her face was not hers. It seemed as though whatever it was had on a hyper-realistic old woman's mask and the largest, most soul-piercing baby blue eyes I have ever seen in my life. So large in fact it appeared like they were not even naturally possible for a human to have, but nonetheless they were beaming at me from behind the holes that were vacant where the old woman's own eyes should have been. The sight took my breath away. Without hesitating, I accelerated my car and slipped a bit in the snow. Long story short, I ended up getting home after calling my ex and telling her to lock her doors. I mentioned it to my parents, and they said it was probably some sick criminal trying to rob some sorry sucker like myself. I say to myself that is probably all it was. But there was something about the almost animated movements it made. The way it seemingly added feet to its height before my eyes. And its own eyes. I can still picture them so vividly all these years later. They were not natural. Whatever I saw out there surely would have succumbed to the elements, and in a small town like mine it would have made the news undoubtedly. I'm a believer in the paranormal, ghosts, and such. However, that was a physical being. I just can't explain better than this what I saw, let alone give it a plausible explanation. I have been in a long-distance relationship with my girlfriend for a couple of years, and every summer and winter break I'm able to travel to go see her. This encounter happened about 2 years ago at my girlfriend's house. I should mention that my girlfriend lives on the outskirts of her city in Mexico, where houses are around 200 to 300 yards apart and surrounded by dense woods. Usually, days and nights go about peacefully, accompanied by the sound of the woods and the occasional car passing by from others who live nearby. I had always considered her place to be perfect to spend time outdoors, until this occasion. Honestly, I don't think I have ever been this scared in my life. I will always remember this sighting. On a chilly night of December, I was at my girlfriend's house. I had planned to spend the night with her since she would have been by herself that day. Her mom was out of town, and she didn't want her to stay by herself either. We were having dinner in the kitchen at around 8 p.m. We chatted about activities we could do tomorrow, tasks her mom asked her to do, and how much we missed each other, among others. After about an hour of conversation and laughter, we decided to go into the living room and cuddle on the couch, watching TV. We both got up and put the dishes in the sink. She went into her bedroom, and I went outside to the bathroom. The house layout consisted of a long corridor that connected pretty much every room in the house and a back door at the end of the corridor, which led to the patio. The patio was open, full of trees and plants, and the only thing separating the patio from the woods was a fence made up of stones and barbed wire that stood at around 1 meter tall. Halfway down the patio, there was the bathroom, being lit by a single and weak light bulb, so if anybody wanted to go, they had to walk outside, even if it had to be in the middle of the night. I'm not coming here at night, I thought. I remember when I opened the back door and stepped into the patio, a cold breeze stroked my face and sent shivers across my back, so I hurried to go back as quickly as possible because, to be honest, I was a little spooked going outside in the darkness, knowing that the woods were pretty much a few steps away. I finished doing my business, washed my hands, and started walking back, careful not to trip on something because the light bulb was almost non-existent. I was about halfway when I heard a noise to my left, like someone stepping on a branch and breaking it. I stopped and quickly turned, trying to see what made the noise, but I could only see a portion of the fence and nothing but darkness beyond that. However, I had this weird feeling that someone or something was watching me, something on the other side of the fence. I stood there in silence for around 30 seconds, listening to the surroundings, only to notice the crickets had stopped chirping. I got a bit freaked out because I knew for sure they were chirping when I first got out. I was somewhat scared to move, but I did anyway, almost running to get inside as soon as possible. When I returned, I went to my girlfriend, who was already in the living room, laying down on the couch with a blanket on top. She noticed I was a bit agitated and asked me what was wrong. "Your patio is scary," I jokingly said, not wanting to tell her what I felt because she hates anything that has to do with horror or scary stuff. I decided to brush it off, so I went around the couch and sat at the other end of it, putting my girlfriend's legs on my lap, and asking what she was watching on the TV. I turned to my right and noticed there was a huge window on one side of the wall that gave me a perfect view of the patio. I didn't see it before because it was next to a cabinet, being covered on the way into the living room. Now that I knew about it, I kept turning to see outside, still thinking how scary it looked. As we were watching a boring documentary, I took off my girlfriend's socks and started to rub her feet below the blanket. After all, it was a chilly night and her feet were cold. We didn't have a conversation. I was getting sleepy, but after around 20 minutes, I started hearing noises outside, noises that seemed to be coming from the patio. I grabbed the controller and muted the TV to make sure I was hearing right, and I was. It sounded like tiny twigs breaking and grass being brushed. I quickly turned to my right to look outside the window, but I could only see the plants and part of the trunk from a big tree. The noise, although faint, stopped for a few seconds, resumed a few moments later, and stopped again. I stood frozen watching outside the window, almost as if waiting for something to appear. "What is that noise?" I whispered to my girlfriend, but after I didn't get a reply, I turned around and stood up a little to see she had her eyes closed and had fallen asleep. I was a bit freaked out, but I chose to believe it was probably a coyote or some other animal that lurks around in the woods at night. I kept watching the TV muted, waiting for the noise to start again, but after a while, I realized it had stopped. I turned around one more time to see outside the window, and I felt my heart sink into my stomach. The first thing I noticed when I looked outside that time was a faint image of a gray, pale and tall humanoid figure, peeking from the side of the big tree trunk, staring right back at me. I suddenly froze in fear, not wanting to even slightly move or breathe. I watched this thing as it watched me, even though I couldn't see its eyes because of the poor lighting, but I knew it was watching me, I knew it was aware of me, I somehow felt it. The creature was, like I said, pale, really pale. I could see the contrast between its skin and the bark of the tree. The creature was very thin, had skinny shoulders and torso, as well as an elongated neck. It looked like it was around 6 or 7 feet tall. Unfortunately, or should I say, fortunately, I could not distinguish in detail any facial features because of how dark it was, but I could perfectly picture in my head the shadowy areas around where eyes would be for a person and another one where the mouth would be. It was sort of grinning. At this point I was trembling a little, and I wanted to let my girlfriend know what I was witnessing, but I didn't want to move a muscle or break eye contact with that thing. I felt like I needed to remain still or play dead to lose its attention, but no, the creature kept staring at me, not moving an inch, like it was trying to do the same. Then, to turn things worse, the creature started to make echoey clicking sounds, kind of like a frog, but slower, and I noticed it began to turn its head to its left side and turned back to look at me really fast. I didn't know what to think anymore. All I wanted was for my girlfriend to wake up to prove to me that thing was real. I began whispering her name in between my teeth and mouth, not even wanting to move my jaw, but she wouldn't wake up, and the thing kept doing the same, turning its head to the left and back to me really fast. The creature crouched, kind of like when big predator cats are hunting and lay low, preparing to attack. "What the duck?" I whispered. I know, stupid, I didn't even think through the fact that if I woke my girlfriend up, she would start moving, and that thing would notice both of us, but I was so scared that I kept trying. This went around for maybe less than 15 minutes before I realized I still had my girlfriend's foot in my hand below the blanket, so the thing would not be able to see me moving. Only using my wrist, I slightly pulled her foot back and forth, whispering her name again and again, but got no response. Then, I stood in shock when I saw the creature stand up again and start walking backwards, still looking at me, and disappearing into the darkness of the patio, doing the clicking sounds again. I passed saliva and blinked a few times, realizing my eyes itched from staring at the creature the whole time. For some reason I couldn't turn my head around. I kept looking in the direction where the creature disappeared, listening for sounds, and waiting for it to appear once again. A few minutes passed, and I took the chance to turn around. Slowly, as if in slow motion, I turned my head to my girlfriend and started calling her name louder, while pushing her leg and quickly scribbling my fingers on the sole of her foot to wake her up fast. Her foot jerked, and she started turning. I stood up to her shoulders and patted her, whispering, "Hey! Wake up, baby!" She opened her eyes and squinted at me, adjusting to the light from the TV, wondering why I woke her up. I kept telling her to remain still and silent when I heard the sound again. She looked at me, noticed the concern in my eyes, and asked, "What's wrong?" "Shh, be quiet," I followed, putting 2 fingers on her lips and looking into her eyes. I could see she was getting freaked out, and I don't blame her. I would be too if someone woke me up, looking scared and telling me to be quiet. The clicking sound went off again, but it was louder this time, almost as if that thing was on the other side of the window. This time, both of us heard the noise, and we stood looking at each other in silence, getting more and more scared. "What is that?" my girlfriend asked, but I remained quiet. Again, in slow motion, I started to turn my head to the window to check, and there it was. The thing was right outside the window, only a couple of feet away, and staring right back at me. This time, I had a clearer vision of how it looked. I was wrong. I petrified in fear when I noticed it didn't have a mouth where a person would have it. Instead, the mouth was on its neck, which opened horizontally, not vertically. As its mouth opened, it vibrated with the clicking sounds, and hundreds of small razor-like teeth shinned with the window glare. It had oval-shaped eyes that were as dark as the night. I felt its gaze pierce through my soul. I started shaking and breathing faster, not believing what I was seeing. My girlfriend peeked by my side to see what I was looking for, and I instantly felt her body tense up under me as she started to ask me in a trembling voice what that thing was, but no answer came out of me. Now we were both scared to even move a muscle. After the humanoid noticed my girlfriend move, it gave a step forward and lowered its head, almost as if it were scanning us. We jumped in fear after seeing the thing doing it because we thought it would start coming towards us. My heart was beating so fast I thought I would faint any time. Then, the thing began to walk slowly to its right side, in the direction where the door to the corridor was, resuming the clicking sounds. If you have seen the movie Signs and remember the scene where the humanoid came out of the bushes outside the house, that would be an accurate representation of what we saw. We took a good look at every inch of that thing's body. It walked with its head turned to us. After we lost sight of it through the window, we both sat up and looked at each other when suddenly, we heard something scratch the metal door that led to the corridor, as if the thing was grazing its fingers on it. Without thinking twice, I grabbed my girlfriend's wrist and jolted out of the living room, locking ourselves in her bedroom. We sat on the floor right next to the bedroom, hiding in case something got inside. The scratching sounds continued, and my girlfriend started to sob, still asking about what we saw. I felt powerless knowing I couldn't do much to reassure her. I could only hold her and hope for the thing to give up and leave. The noise continued for about 3 minutes when it suddenly stopped. Then, we began hearing stepping noises all around the house, and we kept turning to whatever direction we heard the noise come from. Eventually, the noises ceased, and after an hour or so, we figured the creature had left. My girlfriend, still with tears in her eyes, told me if we could lay in bed. I agreed, because my back hurt from being in that crouch position for over an hour. We slowly crawled into bed, making the least noise possible, and covering ourselves with another blanket. "Don't worry, baby, everything is going to be okay tomorrow. Try to get some sleep," I told her as I tightened my grip on her. She didn't reply, but after a while she fell asleep again. I didn't get a minute of sleep that night. I kept my eyes open, listening to every sound around us. The next day we didn't even want to touch the subject. All we said was that the creature was not from this world. My girlfriend said she felt the creature's gaze pierce into her, almost as if that thing was feeling with its pure sight. Nothing else was said. We were left sort of traumatized. I realized she was going to have to put up with that fear of going outside in the future, and I didn't want that thing anywhere near her again, or her family. Days after the encounter, we both suffered from nightmares. She mentioned that she sometimes woke up in the middle of the night, screaming and trembling, and wouldn't be able to stop until her mom went to check on her. The fences that separated the patio and the woods had been redone since they now stand at 2 meters tall, blocking any easy access from the woods. Before this, they had to make sure they didn't have to go outside at night. They haven't had any other encounters again, but my girlfriend insists that the patio gives her chills at night. I keep wondering what that thing was, that humanoid creature. Maybe an alien. The Mothman mystery of Point Pleasant. The first recorded Mothman sighting occurred on the cool evening of November 12, 1966. 5 men were preparing a grave outside of Clendenin, West Virginia, when a winged, humanoid figure descended from a nearby tree and flew down between the group of men before quickly ascending above the tree line and flying away. 3 days later, the most well-known encounter occurred in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. 2 young married couples were on a night drive near the West Virginia Ordnance Works, an area known by locals as the TNT area. There they passed the old power plant when they saw 2 glowing red eyes in the distance. The car slowed to a stop as they tried to figure out what it was they were looking at. The creature in the distance appeared to be 7 to 10 feet tall with a human-like body and wings. The creature stood there staring at them before taking off. The group panicked and sped away, but the creature pursued them. They drove over 100 miles per hour trying to escape from whatever was following them, but the creature continued to follow them until they made it into town. After taking time to compose themselves, the 2 couples decided to go back and investigate the TNT area. They reached the armory that was next to the old power plant, and the creature reappeared. It let itself be known by letting out a loud shriek and began trying to attack their car. They tried to drive away, but the creature landed in front of the car, blocking their escape. When the headlights of the car shined upon the creature, it appeared to be frightened by the light, and it took off and disappeared into the night. The couples made it safely into town a second time and went right to the police to report the mysterious creature they encountered. Deputy Halstead followed them back to where the first encounter occurred, but there was no sign of the creature. When the deputy went to the radio for an update on the situation, a loud shrieking noise came over the radio. It was the same noise the 2 couples heard the creature make earlier in the night. The deputy quickly shut off the radio and left the scene to file his report. The sheriff called a press conference the next day and told the press of what happened the previous night. The press dubbed the creature the Mothman after a villain from the Batman TV show. On November 27, 1967, Connie Carpenter left a church service and witnessed the Mothman on her way home. She was so traumatized by the incident that she could not stop speaking of the creature's devilish red eyes. Soon after, she became the first of many Mothman witnesses to be harassed by strange olive-skinned men dressed in black suits. Newspaper reporter Mary Heyer interviewed many of the eyewitnesses and wrote about the Mothman phenomenon before the men in black tried to silence her and end her investigation. These mysterious men harassed Heyer continuously until her death. On December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge that connected Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and Gallipolis, Ohio, collapsed during rush hour traffic. This resulted in the deaths of 46 people. Official reports say the tragedy was the result of a combination of the bridge's age, poor maintenance, and the increased traffic load. Many, however, reported seeing Mothman before or during the collapse. After the Silver Bridge collapsed, sightings of the Mothman came to an end. John Keel was a journalist who went to Point Pleasant to chronicle the Mothman phenomena. He researched Mothman encounters, and he published his findings in the book The Mothman Prophecies, which was later adapted into the movie of the same name, starring Richard Gere. Along with many locals, Keel hypothesized that Mothman was a precognitive being that was sent to warn people of impending tragedy. His book and movie were responsible for bringing the Mothman phenomenon into the international spotlight. Others believe that Mothman and the unfortunate events that occur in the Point Pleasant area are the result of a curse placed on the land by the Shawnee, Chief Cornstalk. After the Battle of Point Pleasant, the war chief made peace with the American settlers. However, the peace only lasted a year before a group of American soldiers assassinated him. Before his passing, Cornstalk cursed the surrounding area with his dying breath. Other theories include that Mothman may have been a mistaken crane, or owl, or even a mutated crane caused by the chemicals left behind at the old chemical plant in the TNT area. Some people think that the Mothman may have even been an alien because there were numerous UFO sightings reported during the 13-month-long Mothman phenomenon. It is even said that it may have been an undiscovered animal or simply the result of mass hysteria that was fueled by the media reporting sensationalized eyewitness testimonies. Despite the lack of sightings of Mothman in Point Pleasant, there have been recent sightings of Mothman that include outside a mine in Freiburg, Frankreich, Germany, before the mine collapsed a few days later. A Morgan sighting also occurred in Chernobyl before the nuclear meltdown. These events fit the theory that Mothman is a precognitive being that tries to warn others of impending tragedy. Random sightings aside, only one city can compare to the Point Pleasant phenomenon. Since 2016, there have been over 30 reported sightings of a winged humanoid creature in the Chicago area. This monster has been dubbed the Chicago Mothman. These sightings are happening at an almost weekly rate. Those who are familiar with the Point Pleasant Mothman are worried that these sightings may also be an omen of disaster to come. Stick Indians. On New Year's Eve, 1991, my wife and I were walking into Boulder Cave at about 8 or 9 p.m. There was very little snow on the trail, just a skiff. It was a clear, brilliant night, no moon but crisp stars and the occasional cloud. It was dark, but we had flashlights and warm clothes, and we were walking in to meet some friends and spend the night at the cave to celebrate New Year's Eve. If you were wondering, we were bothersome, having met a few years earlier in AA. Back then, the USFS wasn't worried about bats, and you could hike into the cave at any time of the year. Now it closes in the fall to preserve some near-mythical bats that may or may not live in the cave. No one has ever seen these bats except for scientists, and they are probably just pulling our legs. As we made our way up the trail, well made, not very steep, winding through the darkened pines, we could hear children's voices in the distance, like a schoolyard, a playground, or a yard full of happy children running and yelling and laughing far away. At first, we tried to think of what it could be, maybe someone in a cabin or people staying at Camp Roganunda, but on our way in, we'd seen no cars, tracks, or signs of anyone else in the area. Roganunda was closed down tight, and no camps, lights, or fires were off in the distance or by the road. What was a large group of children doing, playing loudly in the distance, up a canyon, in the middle of the woods, on New Year's Eve? It couldn't be sledders because there was barely any snow, and it was way too late for a group of little kids to be frolicking unsupervised in the woods. It was weird and didn't make any sense, but we kept hearing it. There was an odd, consistent quality to the laughing children's noise. It faded in and out of hearing, just on the edge of being there, carried by the wind as if from a great distance, funneled and shaped by the mountains and trees and streams until it found our ears, then back out again, to be lost for a moment, only to return. Laughing, yelling, calling, shouting, playing children. Fading in and out as we would stop and listen till it went away, then walk a few dozen more yards only to stop and listen again. We said, "Do you hear that? Do you hear that?" and would wonder to each other what it could be. On and on as we walked up the trail, the children haunted us, laughing and screaming and yelling just beyond reason and hearing, like sound waves coming through the flames of a campfire, ghost voices traveling on the crisp night air. Anyway, we got to the cave and told our friends about it and puzzled together, but forgot about it after a while and played our flutes and listened to New Age music, on a boombox with cassette tapes, and burned candles and talked philosophy and mystery and deep meaning around the fire until the wee hours of the morning. It was a wonderful time. Walking out, something had changed subtly. The woods seemed a bit ominous, maybe we were just tired. But, as we made our way down the trail, my wife spotted something odd propped against the base of a tree. It was meant to be found, I think, by us, I believe. We thought, at the time, that it had been left for us by whoever or whatever made the laughing noises. As older and more cynical as I am now, I can still believe that is or could be true, though it certainly wasn't the work of children. The object, it is impossible to adequately describe the object. My mind stubbornly refuses to remember it as a whole. I remember the details of its construction and its size and general shape. My wife says it was a man, a figurine of a human. I have to believe her, because when I try to picture it, my mind draws a blank. Its construction was like nothing I've ever seen before or since. It was a small abstract figurine, woven of tiny sticks, moss, pine needle, and lichen. The bear's hair moss had been braided in individual strands into tiny ropes, which wove in and out of bits of lichen and tiny sticks around some bigger sticks smaller than the diameter of a pencil. The main framework of small sticks was lashed together with what looked like the inner bark of cedar, woven into braids and tiny ropes. The workmanship was so intricate, subtle, and bizarre that as we picked it up and looked at it, we were at first amazed, then just a little bit shook. It was unworldly yet complex and woven and weaved from woodland materials seeming gathered at random with great skill, assembled with patience and practice by tiny nimble hands, for what purpose we had no idea. The damn thing was weird. It was easy to dismiss the laughing children as a natural phenomenon, the wind, our imaginations, or just some strange, inexplicable happenings that had a perfectly logical explanation. The figurine was real, and it wasn't on the trail side on the way up. And no one else had been to the cave while we were there, no cars, footprints, no marks in the snow, nothing. I put it in my pack, took it home, and kept it for a while, broodingly examining it closely for clues about I don't know what. The thing was creepy and full of bad magic, and after a while I threw it away. Fast forward, this incident got filed away in my memory, and I gradually forgot about it, mostly. A few years later, in the mid-1990s, I got a job working for a local tribe. This job involved lots of downtime, and my native coworker and I would talk about life, stories, and such. One day I casually recounted this series of events, and when I got to the part about the laughing children, his head snapped around, and he became alert and acutely interested. He quizzed me about every detail, and I recounted the story as I've told it here. He was a reticent guy, but he told me point blank that we'd run into stick Indians and explained briefly what stick Indians are. Warning: do not bring up the subject of stick Indians with a native. It is a forbidden subject. Trust me. Native Americans tend to avoid discussing stick Indians. It's impolite to bring them up in conversation. Please don't. Briefly, the true nature and physical attributes of stick Indians are unknown. No one to my knowledge has ever encountered a stick Indian and survived to talk about it. So the myth is recounted to me, and what little I can find to read about them is that stick Indians are small, vicious, and cunning, semi-manlike but about 3 to 4 feet tall and very skinny, with elongated arms and legs and sharp teeth, and claws on their hands and feet. They live in deep forests and are occasionally heard but never seen. Laughing that we heard is how they lure victims out into the forest, where they become disoriented and lost as they attempt to locate the children playing in the woods. If the victim is an adult, the presumption is that they are attacked and eaten, and whatever remains after the stick Indians are fed is never found. The person becomes permanently lost. If the victim is a small child, the stick Indians turn them into another stick Indian through some dark stick Indian magic. This is how they get new recruits. There is much more to the legend and much more to say that others have told me since, but it is getting late and some things are best left unsaid. For a long time, I didn't feel like I should carry tales or hazard the risk of upsetting natives by speaking these things aloud. So, until now, I've kept these events mostly to myself. I respect the forest, mysteries, the natural world, and indigenous peoples and honor their beliefs. The story of stick Indians would be just another interesting tale for me if I hadn't experienced them myself, maybe. As such, I was privileged with the information I describe here and believe I relayed it as honestly and accurately as I am able. Maybe it wasn't real, and maybe you don't believe me, or maybe there is an explanation for it all that makes sense, but know this, as a practical matter, warn your children. Tell them not to follow the sound of children playing when they are in the woods. Tell them if they follow the sound of children in the distance they might get lost and never come back. Like other legends and myths and tales, there is a kernel of truth at the center, and some truths are bigger than others. For me, I don't know what to think about what happened to us, I only know that it did. So I was in Nevada this past summer, and we went to Laughlin, and my girlfriend and I sat in the hotel room discussing our middle school lives, and I told her about how my best friend and I always loved to find ghosts and hope to catch one. At the same time, my mom and my grandmother came back from gambling, typical when you go to Nevada, and caught the last part of what I was saying and told me to stop. So naturally I questioned why I should, and my mom started speaking to my grandmother in Spanish, and my grandmother looked distraught. She began to speak more in Spanish, and my mom began translating that when she was a little girl, she lived somewhere near LA. And one day she was playing inside the house, and my grandmother was with her, and she told me that when she turned, there was a big, huge bird standing in front of a glass screen door with big red eyes. My grandmother called it un diablo, and when they saw it, it screeched and flapped its wings and flew off, breaking the glass door. They said that later, while they lived there in LA, a reporter was killed and riots broke out in the streets, and flying overhead was the same figure. What is this? I don't know what exactly to call it or what my mom and grandmother saw. Any comments? Something was terrorizing my town. I don't even know where to start. I guess I'll just write it all in chronological order from when I heard other people's stories and then experienced whatever it was for myself. To preface this, I should mention that all of this took place back home on my reservation. I'm Algonquin First Nation from Canada. Another thing I should mention is that, on the res, traditional beliefs and legends of the paranormal are still a big part of our community. The attitude of most people towards the paranormal is one of assurance. To us, the paranormal is a regular part of life. We believe in a spirit world, and sometimes these beings can cross over into our world and maybe even live among us. This all happened in the fall of 2011, when I was 16 years old. I was living in a nearby city with my mom so that I could get a better education than the one I could get back home, but we'd go back every single weekend to see my dad and little brother. One Friday, during the drive back home, I got a text from a friend of mine. She told me about a party that was happening that night and asked me when I'd be home so they could come pick me up. I gave her a time, and that was that. We get home, and as soon as we step inside the house, we see my dad and my cousin sitting at the kitchen table drinking some beers. They're both cops on the res, so usually, beers with his partner on a Friday evening mean that they had a particularly tough week at work. Typically, the toughest cases to deal with are the abuse and molestation ones, so a part of me felt sad immediately that something that awful had happened. They both look worn out and drained, but they're happy to see us. We say our greetings, catch up a little, and my dad asks me if I have any plans. I tell him about the party and where it'll be, and he and our cousin share a weird look. "Why are you making that face, guys? Did something happen?" I asked. "I don't know, should we tell her?" My cousin said this, looking at my dad. He laughed, and they decided that I should probably know what's been going on since I'd be going to a cottage pretty deep in the woods later that evening. They start with the first strange call they got on Monday night. An older woman called, saying that people were outside of her house knocking on all of her windows. She said she couldn't see anybody, but there must have been at least 3 people judging by all the different locations of the knocking. They arrived at the woman's home, looked around the house, even checked the woods, but nothing came up. They tell her that it's probably just some teenagers playing tricks on her and that there isn't much else they can do besides patrol around the area in case they come back. On Wednesday night, the same woman called again with the same problem. It had rained that day, and there was mud all around this woman's home, so they figured that at the very least they'd find footprints, but they couldn't find a thing. This is when they started feeling like something was off, because one of the windows where the woman was adamant about knocking was completely impossible to get to without stepping through this huge mud puddle. This is when they started to think that the woman was lying, but they just told her the same thing they told her a few nights prior. By Thursday night, everyone on the res had been talking about these strange experiences. It turns out, this woman wasn't the only one experiencing the knocking, she was just the only one to call the police. I mean, all of this was taking place on a res, so it wasn't long before people were linking it to supernatural causes. My dad was still sure it was just a group of teens pranking people, but then they got another call from the same woman for the same reason. They rushed over and were met with the same situation, except this time, the neighbor walked over looking pale as a ghost. "That's saying something for brown people, lol." He says. "Is this about the knocking?" They notice he's a little shaky. "Yeah, did you see something?" they asked him. The man nodded and said, "You guys are going to think I'm crazy, but yeah," and he goes on to explain what he saw. He said that he'd stepped outside for a cigarette on his front porch when he heard knocking. He looked around to see where it was coming from, and when he looked to his neighbor's house, he saw it. There was a black figure standing outside the woman's window, the same one with the mud puddle I mentioned, looking into her home. He said it looked humanoid in stature but completely made out of shadow. You could tell it was something solid-ish, but you couldn't make out any features. He stared at it, completely in shock, and watched the thing as it knocked a couple of times and then darted around the house, knocking on every single window. He said it moved too fast to be human, it was practically a blur. It went around the house a few times, then ran across the road into the tree line, behind one tree in particular. The man was frozen, but he couldn't look away. It then leaned out from behind the tree, staring directly at him with yellow eyes that reflected the light similarly to a cat's, and then it smiled, showing its small but numerous pointed and sharp teeth. I almost shit my pants. He had attempted to joke, but his voice was still shaking. Fast forward to Friday, and stories are being exchanged all over the res about other sightings and experiences people were having. On top of multiple people experiencing the knocking, there were also quite a few sightings, with everyone describing the creature in the same way. One woman was bringing her trash bin to the road when she thought she saw someone in her peripheral vision standing near the trees. She walked back up the driveway and into her home, feeling like she was being watched. Right before she was about to open her door to go back inside her home, she looked back and saw two reflective yellow eyes watching her from the trees. She said it was about 5 feet above the ground. Another couple was driving at night, and they saw a humanoid figure standing in the middle of the road. As they got closer, they slowed down, and it turned around to face them. That's when they saw the reflective yellow eyes and the sharp, pointed teeth as it smiled at them. They stopped the car, too afraid to go closer to it, until they decided to just drive past it. Being on a narrow road, they drove past it with the figure being only a few feet from the window, staring at them the whole time. "You sure you still want to go to that party?" My dad inquires, but my friends were already pulling into the driveway. I gave my family hugs and kisses goodbye, and they told me to be careful, but I felt fine. A common belief among native people is that negative energy attracts negative energy, therefore, an evil spirit will be drawn to people with unresolved issues, traumas, and sinners, I suppose. If you're someone who is spiritual, self-aware, and basically a good person, that, in and of itself, will be protective. I get to the party, and within 20 minutes, the conversation shifts towards all the paranormal experiences people have been having. I'm really curious about what everyone has to say, because they have stories that I hadn't heard yet, but my friend, us being 16 and all, couldn't hold her alcohol very well and was crying about how she wishes she was closer with her brother. I was trying to make her feel better while listening to everyone's stories. One of the people at the party was related to the neighbor of the woman who was calling the police. The experience really shook him up, and my friend was just explaining everything that he was doing later on. For example, he smudged his entire home, which is something our people do when we're looking for extra protection against paranormal entities. He also went to visit multiple elders around the community, asking for advice and any information they had on similar happenings. What we do know about paranormal experiences on the res is that they don't happen as often as they used to. If you talk to one of our elders, they have endless stories and even more advice to give about how to protect yourself compared to now. One of the explanations that was given to this guy about the shadow thing was that it was evidence that someone was doing an unauthorized shaking tent ceremony. If you don't know what that is, you can look it up, but it's basically, and I'm generalizing, like an Ouija board session that takes place inside a tent of some sort. People stand around the tent while the medicine man or medicine woman goes inside and asks questions. The tent begins to shake, and you can hear the voices of spirits coming through. I've never personally been to one, because we haven't had a good enough reason to make one, but typically our ancestors used shaking tent ceremonies when they were starving in the dead of winter and needed some direction on where the nearest food source was. My mom's been to one, and her story is absolutely crazy. She described multiple voices of men and women, only speaking the native tongue, and they were upset that the people were doing a shaking tent ceremony when they weren't on the verge of death. The people there had to explain that they were only doing the ceremony to prove that it was real, as we had been losing our culture as a result of residential schools, but the spirits were angry about this, saying that the bridge between the two worlds should never be opened unless absolutely necessary because you don't know who you're communicating with. It could be evil spirits and it could be good ones, it could be ancestors, but you never know. Anyways, the elders told him that this spirit crossed over into our world because of a shaking tent ceremony. Someone on the reserve has been doing them without consultation of the elders. So, we started thinking about who would do that, without proper guidance and without good enough reason to do so. Then two of the drunkest dudes at this point start saying shit, like, I'm not scared, that thing could show up now and it couldn't do shit, basically egging it on. All of us were looking at each other like, why the duck would you disrespect an evil spirit? That's exactly how you attract it to you, and that's when I decided to leave the sunroom where everyone was hanging out. I went to the living room to console my drunk, crying friend when I noticed that the rocking chair outside on the porch was going back and forth. I looked away immediately, refusing to make direct eye contact, but I did see it from my peripheral vision. I'm inside the cottage, and I keep seeing this rocking chair going back and forth, but another thing we're raised to do in our culture is to ignore paranormal experiences. Spirits feed on the energy that people put towards them, so if you freak out, if you get angry, if you yell at it, or start crying, that's exactly what it wants, and it will stick around once it gets a reaction. It thrives on energy of any kind, so while I knew something ducked up was happening on the rocking chair, I wasn't about to pay it any attention. 5 minutes or so go by, and I'm still seeing it move in the corner of my eye. When my friend screams, she runs across the room. My other friend, 2, sprints to where girl, 1, was sitting and busts through the French doors onto the balcony. All of this happens in a split second, but I immediately go to the patio and ask what's going on. Girl, 1, is crying on the couch with friends all around her. She claims to have seen the spirit, which we later nicknamed Kokogi, an Algonquin word for monster. She said she was listening to the boys talk about the spirit when she saw boy, 2's face as he was looking out onto the balcony behind her. She turned around to see what he was looking at, and directly on the other side of the window was the shadow spirit sitting on the rocking chair, smiling at her, literally 3 feet from her. That's when boy, 2, sprints towards it and busts through the French doors. I walk outside to find boy, 2, on the lawn, staring into the woods. I call his name, and he looks up at me. All he says is get everyone inside, and the tone of his voice just makes me automatically obey. I get all the drunk teenagers inside the cottage. This is when the phrase come at me, bro was just gaining popularity, so you could imagine the drunk kids yelling that into the woods. It was terrible. I eventually get everyone inside, and girl, 1, isn't crying anymore, but she is visibly shaken from the experience. Boy, 2, comes back inside and tells everyone to clean up and that we should leave as soon as possible. Everyone has trash bags and is cleaning away all the beer bottles and cans. Everyone goes into the cottage, and it's only me and boy, 2, in the sunroom now. I look to him for answers, and all he says is, it's outside. I nod and start cleaning faster. The sooner we're out of here, the sooner we're away from that thing. As we're cleaning in the sunroom, we hear knocking on the windows in multiple places. The entire sunroom is made of glass, but it's dark out, so you can't even see outside. I immediately look to boy, 2, and he just says, ignore it. Within 2 seconds, someone comes running out of the bathroom and says, I'll duck and kill whoever's outside knocking on the bathroom window, but everyone's inside and accounted for. Someone else comes running out of the bedroom, saying that there was knocking on the window in there as well. Now, everyone's freaking out, and me, boy, 2, and our one other friend are the only sober ones to calm everyone down. We get the place clean and get outside to the cars immediately. Everyone's getting into the trucks, and I'm standing with boy, 2, he's relaxed, but then all of a sudden looks behind me and shoves me inside his truck. We peel out of the driveway and drop everyone off. A few days later, I end up hanging out with boy, 2, and he tells me the story from his perspective. He said that when the boys started talking shit about the spirit, it appeared on the rocking chair behind girl, 1. He said he made eye contact with it and couldn't look away. They were staring each other down, and that's when girl, 1, saw boy, 2's expression. He said it was instinct to defend the people he was with and ran towards them. He said that the feeling he was getting from the Kokogi was almost like he was daring him to do something. He said the second he got up, the Kokogi stood and ran into the woods, disappearing from the patio in a blur. Boy, 2, ran off the porch and was looking around the lawn when he saw it standing at the tree line, looking right at him with a smile on its face. He said the whole time it felt like it was mocking him. I called boy, 2's name, and it disappeared. He didn't see it again until everyone was getting into the trucks, which explains why he suddenly pushed me inside. He said that it was standing on the far end of the truck, super close to us. Later that night, when he dropped everyone off, they realized that they never locked the door, so he went back to the cottage, but his friend, whose cottage it was too scared to go in. Boy, 2, goes in by himself, but the second he opens the door, he sees the thing standing inside the living room. He locks the door as quick as he can, and they peel out of the driveway. So yeah, sightings continued for a few days after that. We definitely weren't the only people on the res to have experiences like this, and then it stopped all of a sudden. It was the talk of the res, everyone was curious about what happened to it. Would it come back? What was it? Etc. But word ended up getting around that there were sightings north of our community. White people in the town just north of us were having sightings, and then other reservations were having sightings as well. It was like it was traveling north, the way the stories were going. Anyways, it's 2018 now, and no one else on my reserve has had any sighting of this particular thing. But yeah, that's my story. This all happened 2 years ago, in 2020, April 20th, to be exact. I first encountered this thing one night when I was sitting around my campfire, and I just happened to look at my neighbor's window and see this sickly looking dog staring at me. I knew my neighbors really well, best friends in fact, and I thought, oh, maybe they adopted an older dog, I'll ask them tomorrow when I see them, so that's what I did. They looked at me in confusion and said, dog? We don't have a dog, I said, I saw this old looking dog in y'all's window last night. And that's when it all started. The next night I was sitting in my chair next to the fire and my sleeping puppy reading a book. All of a sudden I heard a big bark so loud, in fact, my ears hurt from it coming from my backyard. My dog, now fully awake, looks at me and "You heard that too?" Kinda way. I instantly got up and walked to my back window and saw two eyes looking at my house, so I grabbed a light and shined it through my open window and seen the dog, the same old dog from the night before in the window, but it wasn't a dog. Well, not a normal one, it was gray with big bulging eyes, a tongue hanging to the side, and dried blood on its upper lip. I turned around and got my hunting rifle, and with my pistol on my hip, my rifle in hand, and my flashlight, I went out back. As I opened my back door, I noticed the dog was nowhere to be seen. Like it vanished in thin air, gone. So I went back inside, confused and wondering what the hell I just saw. I sat back down and decided that it was time for a bed. As I was brushing my teeth, I heard the super loud bark again. I peeked out of the blind, and nothing was there, no eyes, nothing, just the bark that seemed to come from my backyard. I shook it off and walked to my bedroom and laid down. I finally nodded off to sleep 30 minutes later. And not even 30 minutes later I heard the loud bark again, and every hour I woke up again to the loud bark. I finally had enough when I got up again. And the alarm clock read 3 a.m. in bright red numbers. I grabbed my pistol off my nightstand and headed down my hallway, with my dog not far behind. I turned around the corner to go down the stairs, and there it is. It stands at the base of my stairs, gazing intently at me. Moonlight is shining on it like an eerie monster from a movie. I aimed my pistol as my dog started crying. At that point, I knew it wasn't my imagination, it was there. I aimed and shot one round into its face. It seemed to bounce off this beast, and it barked loudly and slowly walked away. I ran down the stairs, flipping on the light, and it was gone, nowhere to be found. I was confused and scared, shaking so badly. I sat in my chair, wondering what that was. I faced a grizzly bear at 30 yards with just a bow in the Yukon wrestled bulls, but this made me shake bad. As I'm thinking, I heard 3 knocks at my door, and it made me jump. I ran to the door and opened it, ready for anything. Luckily it was just Adam and Bree. They heard the shot and ran over. I told them what happened. They looked at me confused but believed me because of how shaken up I was. It's 2 years later. I have nightmares, often haven't seen it since though. I moved away from that area and bought a bunch of land with Adam and Bree. What was that thing? This story takes place in a very small town called Elbert, Colorado, that's very far out in the middle of nowhere. Like a grocery trip took a 45-minute drive just to get to a store. I moved out there in the summer of 2013, when I was about 11. My family lived on an 8-acre piece of property in a fairly thick pine forest, with the house just outside the very edge of it. The driveway to the house was a super crappy, super long dirt road that led out to the main street that had to be a little less than 1/8 of a mile away from the house. To this day, I think that place was the most peaceful place that I've ever gone to. The only sounds that could be heard were those of nature and our chickens, as we could not hear the rare car that would pass by. The nights were the best part of the place, though. Because of the lack of city lights, I was able to see every detail of the night sky down to the dimmest star. Because of the darkness, however, you weren't able to see a single thing below the horizon of the night sky. Along with that, there were several packs of coyotes that lived out there, and every night they'd all be howling at each other. With enough of them, the noise would almost sound like water. The only thing that really sucked about the property, however, was the walk that we had to make just to take the trash out. The garbage company would only accept the cans that were brought out to the main road. We'd normally take the trash out before it got dark, but occasionally I'd forget and would have done it at dark, which I typically didn't mind. The trip would normally be a super peaceful walk out, and we had headlamps at the ready so that we could actually see where we were going in the dark. Well, the summer before I moved out, there was a night where I forgot to take out the trash during the day, and the batteries on the headlamps were dead. This meant I had to try to navigate my way down our driveway, almost completely blind. I went outside and stood next to the trash cans for a minute or two, staring into the darkness, in order to hopefully adjust my eyes. Staring into the darkness though, I felt like there was something off. The normal coyote sound was gone, and for some reason, my eyes just would not adjust to the dark. I kept staring into the abyss, looking for any sign that my eyes might be adjusting, but to no luck. Then, this terrible feeling tore its way into my chest. The best way that I can describe it is as if this darkness, this abyss that I was staring into, was staring back at. No, into me. I was frozen with fear. I knew I was alone out there, but something told me that if I were to walk into the darkness, I would not be returning. I continued staring, almost unable to look away from the darkness for a long time before my mom came out to check on me. Her opening the door seemed to break me out of my trance, so I ran to her and started crying. She looked at me confused and noticed that I still hadn't taken the trash out. After telling her about what I felt, she laughed a little and gave me some encouraging words, telling me that if there was anything out there, our dogs would surely have noticed by now. She then told me to come back in 10 minutes for ice cream. I turned and walked back to our trash cans, shaking. I had never been so scared in my life, and what of nothing? I chuckled to myself, realizing the absurdity of it. When I took my eyes back off the ground, the chuckle turned back into a cry. I realized that I wasn't scared of anything. I was terrified that there was something out there that I could not see, waiting for me to leave the light of the house lamp to attack. Then, the coyotes started, and my eyes started adjusting. Whatever might have been out there was gone, along with all of my fear. The tears stopped along with most of the fear, and I was able to start dragging the trash cans down. The walk was somewhat scary, though I was able to let the sound of the coyotes distract me. By the time I got back up to my house, I felt safe again, but I could not stop thinking about that abyss. While I lived at that house, that was probably my scariest encounter. There were other scary encounters while I was there, but the only one that could even slightly relate to the other takes place at my friend's house. For the sake of privacy, I'll simply refer to this friend as D. D had a property that was about 10 minutes from mine, and we shared the same forest, the only separation being a road in between us. We had been hanging out for a while that day playing a bunch of video games, and I had an idea to go out in the dark and explore his property. He agreed, and so we waited until night fell. After a few more hours of video games and dinner, it finally seemed dark enough to go out, so we did. We were wandering his 7-acre property being pretty stupid, loud, and making half-hearted attempts at trying to get each other a little scared. After some time of this, we eventually wandered into a clearing, and I just guessed the attempt settled in for both of us. At the same time, we looked around, concerned. There was something wrong, and it felt like we were being watched. Trying to keep a good mood, and maybe trying to keep my mind off whatever was making us feel this way, I suggested we make a scary video to scare D's little brother. D laughed and agreed and pulled out his phone and started recording. We were acting like we kept seeing things in the woods. I would throw a stick when the camera was facing away, make weird grunting noises, and so on, in order to make the video creepy. We both were having a good time. However, deep down, I felt like something was very off, and I think that he did too. Then, out of nowhere, a twig snapped behind us. I automatically assumed that D had thrown something, but when I looked at him to confirm, he was looking at me to see if I had thrown it. Before this moment, I was trying diligently to make my voice sound as scared as possible for the video. However, as soon as I heard this, I didn't need to try anymore. We stared in the direction that the twig snap came from for a second, hoping to make out something, but to no avail. Once again, my eyes would not adjust to the darkness, except this time instead of physically standing in the light, I was inside of the darkness. Partially for the video, and partially for my sanity, I whispered run. D nodded slightly, his face illuminated by his phone, and then we started sprinting in the direction of his house. I don't think I had run so hard in my life beforehand, but there was a feeling in my gut still telling me that we weren't fast enough and that we needed to hide. D must have felt the same thing. He took the lead and led us to a nearby cat shed. A motion sensor light flicked on as we passed by, and we got in the shed as quickly as we could. After getting the door shut, D turned on his light, revealing the inside of the shed. At the time, it seemed to me like the cats were hiding from something. However, looking back on it, they were probably just sleeping in their beds that were in a corner of the house. This freaked me out even more. D started climbing the wall of the shed and led us onto almost a shelf-like structure that had a window that we could look out of. D sat on one side of the window, and I sat on the other, so that we were facing each other, and we could see both angles from the window. Eventually, with the light on outside and the added comfort of a roof over our heads, we started to calm down and focus on the video again. As we were talking about what might have been out there, the motion sensor light turned off, dropping the outside back into the dark. We went quiet, as the uneasy feeling washed over us again. To me, it didn't feel like we were being watched anymore, more like we were being looked for. We started intently out the window, looking for signs of anything, when I thought I started hearing footsteps. Having a wall between us and the steps muffled them, so I couldn't be sure what I was hearing. I asked D about them, and he said that he heard them. However, I'm pretty sure he was saying that for the video. We went quiet again, listening. Then I heard the footsteps get slightly louder. One of the cats started rubbing up against us, which distracted us and caused us to turn around and start petting him, because who wouldn't pet a cat? As we were petting him, the outdoor motion sensor light flicked on. I felt goosebumps crawl up my arms to my face as we slowly turned around. We looked out the window and saw nothing. Dee told me that we should get inside, and I agreed with him. We carried the cat back down to its bed and got ready to make a 50-yard sprint directly to his house. He opened the door, and I shut it, and then we were in the cold, dark woods, running as hard as we could from whatever turned on that light. After what felt like forever of sprinting, we finally got to Dee's door and rushed inside. We slammed his sliding glass door and didn't sleep until we saw the sun rising the next morning. Though these encounters were terrifying at the time, a lot of it can be easily explained by me just freaking myself out. There was nothing out there during the trash can story, and at Dee's house, we found raccoon prints the next morning outside of the cat shed. None of these things ever stopped me from loving the woods, and within a week I was certain that I was just making things up to myself. I continued loving the woods we lived in for the next year that we lived there, but eventually, my family and I ended up moving out. My dad got a job offer in Minnesota that would improve our financial situation and not force my dad to a 2-hour commute every day. Minnesota, however, proved to be the worst place that I've lived in, at least for the first year or two. After living in such a small town and adapting to my friends in Elbert so much, I found it very hard to make any friends in Minnesota. I was constantly thinking about my friends and the girlfriend I had left in Elbert and refused to work to make friends, and the people at my new school didn't particularly seem to like me. I would still talk to my Elbert friends almost every night, playing video games and stuff with them, which was almost the only thing that seemed to make me any sort of happy while I was there. With my mental health in the garbage and my lack of any friends, my parents agreed to let me go out to Elbert during the summer and visit my friends. After the first visit, my mental health was way better, and I started opening up to other people at the new school as well, so my parents agreed to make the Elbert trips annual as long as I planned them. Yeah, I have the coolest parents ever. Of all time. So, every year since then, I've been visiting my friends in Elbert. The most recent visit is the reason that I'm writing this. Every year I would hang out with my friends, who I'll call K, T, and D, same D from the other story. Because of stupid teenager drama, they would almost never hang out together. One of my favorite things to do with them was ironically go squatching. Squatching is looking for Bigfoot, typically making their hypothetical calls, and using other communication methods of theirs in hope to find one. This was simply an excuse to go yell in the forest at night for me. This most recent visit, I finally managed to get K, T, and D to all hang out together. We had planned on making a short film that was based on these stupid videos that T and I used to make. We ended up trying to film it but ending up with like one scene before we decided to just play video games instead. Well, one day, after dinner, the group came up with an idea to make a squatching video. T, K, and I filmed one last year, so we figured that we'd do another one this year and try to make this an annual thing. We took K's little brother out with us to film for us, and we started recording our video. The sun was still up, so it had no intention of being any sort of scary, just a funny ironic video. We wandered around for an hour or so, making shitty Australian accents and shouting for Bigfoot, when Kay had the idea that we could split up and look for Sasquatch, so we did. We each went off on our own into these woods, with the cameraman following me, each making the occasional squatch call and tree knock. We had some walkie-talkies with us, so we were able to tell each other when we were making a call. After some time, D, T, and I found each other and decided to group up and meet K up in a clearing. We started walking, and K came in over the radio, saying that he was about to make a call. We waited, and from the forest came the most terrifying noise I've ever heard somebody make. The best way that I could describe it was like a dying elephant that had a smoking problem. Then he came in over the radio. "Was that you guys?" he asked. We assumed that he was joking around for the video, so we joked back, "No, mate, we've pissed the squatch off. We need to get the duck out of here. Meet us back at your house." We ran out of the forest quickly. When we met up with Kay, he apparently had cut himself on some barbed wire, and that plus the terrifying scream we heard him make earlier seemed to put us off, so we decided to stop for the time being. We went inside and played Halo for hours, messing with each other and doing other stupid stuff, not mentioning what had happened while squatching the rest of the night. When night had more than passed and it was around midnight, we decided to go back outside and continue squatting, this time without a camera and with a bunch of flashlights. We decided to go pretty deep into the forest before not making any calls as to not wake Kay's family and neighbors up. Eventually, we got to the point that we had split up earlier and had to decide what to do. After talking about it some, we decided to see where Kay had run off to. Then, I made the first squatch call of the night. After the call, the woods went completely silent. In my previous story, I talked about the abyss watching me. This was almost the same, except it felt as if the forest were listening to us. We laughed about it and poked fun at each other, trying to creep one another out, and started walking. Kay led us pretty deep into his woods and eventually stopped in a small opening, showing us that this had been where he had radioed us from before the call. The thing is, Kay didn't refer to the call as his. He referred to it as one of ours. This didn't register at the moment, but thinking back on it definitely gives me the creeps. After a bit more joking around, Kay decided to take us to the boundary of his property, where he had cut himself. We walked in a straight line toward the fence, and I think Kay figured we'd follow the fence to where he cut himself. As we walked deeper into the forest, though, our jokes started to die down. The silence, darkness, and this feeling started getting to us. We were starting to suspect that we were being watched. We arrived at the fence and started walking along in when Kay stopped, confused. I looked at where his flashlight was pointing, and there was the fence. However, the fence was almost dented, if that makes any sense. It looked like something had come through and simply stepped on the fence with enough weight that the fence couldn't bring itself to its natural position. I shined my flashlight into the other property and asked Kay about it. I can't remember exactly what he told me, but I think I remember him saying it was a large piece of property owned by a Native American land and had once been sacred or something like that. That was probably terribly wrong, so take that info with a grain of salt. Our group looked at each other. Let's go over it, I remember myself saying. Worst case scenario, we find whoever's property it is, and we can tell him about the broken gate. This was obviously not the worst case scenario, especially out in the country like this, but we continued anyway. After going through some more pretty heavy woods, we found a clearing, and then we felt something awful. The hair on the back of all of our necks stood up at once, and we started hearing slight twig snaps in every which direction. This was a massive change from the previously quiet forest that we had just been walking through. We quickly shined our lights every which way, looking for anything that could be causing our fear, when Dee's beam stopped on something. Guys! Do you see that? We all shined our lights on the spot that he was looking at. I couldn't see anything at first and was about to say no when I made out what looked like the reflection of eyes. We each confirmed, one by one, each of us starting to make out the eyes. Then we did something stupid. We started walking toward it. Maybe this was because there were 4 of us and 1 pair of eyes, or maybe it was how luring they looked. But every step we took, the more they faded out, until we couldn't see them anymore. Then, we felt the hairs on the back of necks stand up more than ever, as if pointing in the direction of something that did not approve of us being there. We stood back to back, making a square, as we felt the presence circling us. Guys, let's get out of here. One of the group members spoke. We all nodded and waited, then, when the time felt right, we sprinted. We all ran as fast as we could, jumping over the fallen fence, through the forest, and eventually seeing the house. I heard the others run by me, hidden in the forest, when suddenly I stopped. Ryan! Help! My heart sank. I had just heard the other 3 run by me, yet this was the perfect voice of Kay, calling for my help. I shoved the thought that this could be Kay out of my head. After all, I had just heard all 3 of my friends run by me. I began sprinting again, hoping to catch up with Kay. After sprinting for a minute or 2, I caught up with them, beginning to slow down, almost at the house. I caught up with Kay and was about to try to talk to him when we both flinched backward, almost falling. Just to the right of us, there was a crashing thunder of something that had just hit the ground. We quickly recovered and sprinted in toward the door, urging the others on. When we finally got back to Kay's house, we slammed the door behind us and had to just rest, panting. When we all seemed to calm down, Kay asked what the hell happened out there. We all went around and shared what they saw. Dee said he saw the reflection of eyes and more than what was just in the clearing. Kay said he saw the reflection of eyes in the clearing and heard the 2 thuds that freaked us both out. Dee said he might have seen the eyes in the clearing and some yellow-red ones as we were closing the door. I stated what I saw but decided to leave out the voice since I wasn't, and still am not, sure I heard what I heard. We sat down and almost immediately started searching up cryptids and looking for other stories like ours. Within half an hour, our primary theories were of a goat man, a Jersey devil, and possibly a Wendigo. Almost in response to our theories, we heard 2 ever so quiet footsteps on the roof. Eventually we got to sleep, but after that, we never spoke a word of it again. Maybe a year or so later, I was trying to creep myself out when I found stories about Wendigos. These stories sounded familiar to my experience but didn't seem to be quite right. Well, that led into a rabbit hole, and eventually I learned about skinwalkers. Since then, I've loved hearing stories about them and am very fascinated with what they are and how they hunt. I've stopped believing recently, however, after rethinking my tale for like the 100th time. I'm 90% sure that what we heard and saw was just a horse that we got onto the bad side of, which is oddly common, I guess. What really spooks me out, however, is when I let the 10% wander and think that it might have been something paranormal. Either way, I don't understand how Kay still lives on that property. I'll be visiting him this summer, so I'll see them again, but hopefully we won't encounter whatever we might have last time. This happened somewhere between 1997 and 1999. I was in my late teens, and we were living in New Mexico, close to the Four Corners. My parents were pastors at a local church in a tiny town. We had lived outside of town, sort of in the middle of nowhere, and there were a few houses sprinkled around us. Surrounding was, at least, where there were no houses, there was some brush and a lot of desert. Ever since we moved there, the locals told us about skinwalkers, even people in the church warned us about them. One guy in the church swore up and down that when he was a truck driver, he saw a skinwalker in its human form running alongside his truck when we were going about 80 miles per hour, but since I didn't witness it, I just took him at his word. I had heard many different tales on the origins of the skinwalkers, both from the locals and the Native Americans. There was a Native American who went to our church who still held on to his Navajo beliefs and who told me what I always assumed to be a more accurate description. He told me that when people of his tribe had a child out of incest, the tribe leaders took the baby out into the desert to be raised by wolves. The wolves would raise it, and they would become skinwalkers, having the powers to turn into anything, animals, humans, etc. The story fascinated me, he just seemed to know for sure that this was the accurate tale. Then he warned me to never whistle at night, which I thought was pretty weird, but I never did, until one night. It was in the fall, around 11 o'clock at night. I was in my bedroom, which was the furthest room from anyone in the house and near the garage, watching TV or playing PlayStation. My mother was in her bedroom, and my dad was at the church studying as he always did till around midnight. My brother had a friend over that night, and they were going to spend the night on the back patio, which was a long rectangular room with screen windows all down. Like I said, I was in my bedroom minding my business when my brother and his friend came banging on my door. Annoyed, I opened the door, and my brother, who is 4 years younger than me, and his friend are both frightened. My brother said as they were in the patio goofing off they heard someone walking around the backyard and saw what looked to be the top of a white bald head walk by the screen windows. Now normally I would believe my brother since he would never make this kind of stuff up, but his friend was a huge liar and had told tall tales about having been to Mars, even showing us the red dirt, which looked an awful lot like the red dirt you could find throughout the area, I might add. Of course, by this time I had experienced a lot of paranormal stuff, but I was still skeptical. Bravely, and annoyed, I grabbed my jacket and a flashlight, and the three of us went out to the patio. It was always creepy at night because it was always so dark and the only light came from a nearby lamppost a few yards down the street. Our backyard was insanely small except for the right-hand side of it, which was a bit bigger but held a trampoline, which took up the better part of it. We stepped out of the patio, my flashlight shining around the yard, but I saw nothing. That was when I started hearing the crunching of leaves coming from the front yard, so the three of us went through the back gate to the front yard. Now our front yard was huge and had roughly 9 apple trees. There was even a large creepy tree in the corner of the yard near the street I always stayed clear of for some reason. We had a close neighbor, literally on the other side of the wooden fence. It was a nice family that had a daughter about my brother's age, and they also had a bunch of chickens, and sometimes they would wander into our yard, so that is what I thought was walking around our front yard. Shining the flashlight around, of course I couldn't see any chickens, but I did see something white walk behind a tree near the wooden fence. That was when I got very curious. The three of us walked slowly to the tree. I was the protective big brother and kept the other two behind me. Before I knew it, I heard a loud whistling and felt a gust of wind, like something had flown by us. My brother screamed out in pain. My brother always had his shirt off, which annoyed me because back then I was overweight and very self-conscious, but I noticed on his chest he had 3 long scratches across him. Scared and shocked, my brother ran back inside the house, leaving me and his friend. It all happened so quickly, but I ran towards the street where I was sure whatever it was had gone, his friend close behind me. Once we reached the end of our property, I could hear the sound of bare feet running down the paved road. I shined my light towards the sound but never saw anything. So I whistled some tune, and from down the road I heard the same tune whistle back to me. Intrigued, I whistled again, this time a different tune, and again the same tune was whistled back. My brother's friend started getting scared and kept trying to get me to go back inside, but I was very intrigued. I whistled for the 3rd time, and that was when, very close by, we both heard a male voice say, "Hey kid, come here." There was no hesitation, the two of us bolted back inside. We went to go tell my mother what happened, and she was already frightened because she was tending to my brother's scratches on his chest. We told her what happened, and my mother told us to stay inside. My mother has had some pretty scary paranormal encounters before. I need to tell those stories soon, so she believed us. I have never forgotten that encounter. My brother brushes it off these days, making it out to be not a big deal, but I know differently, as does my mother. It's one of the many incidents in my life that literally bothers me to this day. There is something unnatural living in the pines behind my house. To begin, I'm not crazy, nor am I hallucinating. I'm not selling anything, so you don't have to buy anything. I habitually rise early, around 4 a.m. most days, and my custom is to go outside and light my pipe just before the sun rises. That morning I was outside with a cup of tea just before dawn. I was thumbing a bowl of tobacco in my pipe when I heard a shuffling toward the pine trees at the edge of my property. The back of my house faces the edge of a thick lot of short pine trees, and I see critters run in and out of it all the time, so I assumed the noise was an armadillo or something. But when I looked up, I saw what looked like an obese woman with sagging breasts, but her head was kind of like an odd lump on the shoulders. Very small and without hair or features like a typical head. I immediately knew it wasn't an animal of any sort, so I set my things down on the patio table and called out to her. There was just enough light from the floodlights on my house to see a large, bare bottom turn and run away. I could very easily hear the thumping sounds of feet in the pines. I called the police right then and there and told them what I'd seen. 3 county deputies responded within 20 minutes, and they scoured my entire property and searched around the edge of the pine trees. For over an hour, I recalled what I'd seen, giving them every detail I could remember. None of us could come up with any explanation. As I know all of my closest neighbors personally, I have only 2 neighbors, and the lot of pine trees itself is 20+ acres and connects to a stretch of grassland where the closest humans would be whoever is on the interstate. I urged them to search the pines, convinced there was a naked woman running around in there. Methamphetamine and other harsh drugs are not unknown where I live, and in my years living in this region I have seen my share of crazed addicts. The deputies told me they couldn't search just then and that they would need help. They filed a report and ordered me to go inside and lock my doors. I did so. I also retrieved my pistol from the bedroom and stuck it in my waistband. Around 1 p.m., a new lot of deputies came knocking, and I walked them around exactly where I'd seen this person. 2 of them hung back with me while the others went into the pines, looking around. They spent about a half hour in there before they came back with no evidence or explanation. They were all very helpful but didn't sound very concerned and eventually left after scanning around my backyard a bit too. I told my sister and close friends about the incident, and we all speculated for a while about it. Every morning since then, when I went out to have my morning smoke, my eyes were fixed on the pines, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary until I was up late one night. As an early riser, I typically fall asleep in my chair around 9 p.m. as I'm getting up in years and don't have the stamina I once had. But one night I'd been entertaining guests and had made a pot of strong coffee, so I couldn't sleep. I'm normally a tea drinker, so I'm somewhat sensitive to coffee strength. It was around 1 a.m., and my friends had left around an hour before. I cleaned up a bit, then stepped out back with a glass of wine to have a before bed smoke. I turned the back lights on and stepped out, and I immediately saw the fat woman again. This time I could see her much better. When the dim light hit her body, she moved like a dog would if it had suffered an injury. It was a natural lope for an animal but not for a human. I could see her face this time, but it looked like she didn't have a nose, and her head was entirely too small for her large body. She loped into the pines again, but this time I ran towards her as fast as my legs could carry me. I have very little cartilage left in my knees, so it wasn't very fast. I heard her shuffling away into the pines just as I reached the tree line, so I called the police. They said they were on their way, so I went back inside, turned on all the outside lights, and grabbed a flashlight and my pistol. I told them everything I'd seen and again everything I'd observed before, and this time they went deep in the pines. I could see their flashlights flickering around, and they finally came back and said they couldn't find anything. They advised me again to lock my doors and keep my gun close at hand. After the police left, it was almost 3 a.m., and when I went inside, my cat Augustus was growling at the back window. His tail was twice its normal size, and he was in a fit mood. I decided to try to nap in my big chair, hoping my cat would join me, but we were both too nervous, I saw. Just before dawn, I'd almost fallen asleep when Augustus began growling loudly again and slapping at the small window. I turned on the lamp and got a full glimpse of the half-face of the large woman. I knew it was her immediately. Her face has holes where a nose should be and swollen lips. Her eyes were dark brown all over and not like normal eyes. I got up and yelled, pointing my pistol at her, and she turned and ran. I saw her scramble away through the window, then went to the patio door and turned the lights on so I could see better. Her breasts were swinging, as was the mass of her body as she ran toward the pines. I opened the door and fired 2 shots toward the top of the pines. I had no desire to harm her, But I wanted to put the fear in her that I was armed and done playing around. I'm not a young man, and I live alone with a faithful cat and several guns. I again called the police. Only this time I went to their office to speak to a detective. She was more than helpful and said they would patrol the area regularly and that if someone was running around out there, they would catch her. This was in January, and I didn't have any more problems except for my guard cat and me not being able to sleep very well at night. I haven't seen her since then, but I know in my heart now she isn't really a woman but something else. It's been 3 weeks since I've last heard from the police about it, but I lately have the feeling that she is still out there. Augustus and I are ready if she comes back, though he is much braver than I am. I'm thinking about moving away.